Under the shade of a massive, ancient tree, two young friends sit together, looking out over a peaceful valley. The boy suddenly stands, full of youthful bravado, and declares his ambition to become the world's greatest adventurer. His companion isn't about to be left behind, playfully protesting that she will be the one to claim that title. She laughs, her face lighting up with joy as they strike a pact. They decide then and there that they will both reach the pinnacle of the adventuring world together. 4 years have passed since that day, and the reality of the world has proven harsh for Essen. He stands before the guild boards, his face etched with frustration as he stares at his abysmal rank of 96,743. Behind him, the whispers of other adventurers sting. They mock his lack of progress, labeling him the eternal last place and suggesting he should have just stayed a farmer. This world is governed by a rigid hierarchy, where the names of every registered adventurer are etched into a massive stone ranking table. Every sunrise, the list updates automatically, recalculating their standing based on their latest contributions and achievements. While he struggles at the bottom, his childhood friend has taken a very different path. Polari, now a formidable presence, pushes herself to the limit, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity as she demands more of herself, refusing to give up. He looks on, a quiet, bittersweet smile touching his lips as he reflects on how far apart their paths have diverged. The guild hall is alive with rumors of her meteoric rise, with seasoned warriors marveling at the ice princess who has already climbed to the 9th rank. Despite his own stagnation, Essen holds onto the memory of their shared promise, watching her from the shadows as she becomes the legend they both dreamed of being. He stands before the massive ranking board, a confident smirk playing on his lips despite his lowly position. Nearby, other adventurers whisper in confusion, unable to fathom why the man at the very bottom of the list looks so satisfied with himself. The whispers turn into cruel gossip as one man recounts seeing him scavenging through a restaurant's refuse just the other day. His companions react with disgust, their judgment of the struggling adventurer deepening with every word. Overhearing the insults, the young man keeps his head bowed, his smile faltering as they compare him unfavorably to the legendary Ice Princess. They hurry away, mocking him as if his misfortune were a disease and claiming that even his presence carries the stench of trash. Once they are gone, he sharply slaps his own cheeks to snap out of the gloom, refusing to let the harsh words take root. He has heard it all before, and with a renewed sense of purpose, he decides that dwelling on their negativity is a waste of his time. Beyond the walls of the bustling city, the vast landscape stretches out, dominated by the imposing circular fortifications that protect the heart of the adventurer's hub. Reaching the outskirts, a hand presses firmly against the cold surface of an ancient stone pillar, triggering a surge of magical energy that ripples through the air. The path leads to the entrance of the White Mist Forest, an F-rank dungeon where the trees are shrouded in a perpetual, ghostly haze. He stands at the threshold, ready to face whatever challenges lie within the verdant depths. Almost immediately upon entering, the peace is shattered as a massive, tusked beast lunges from the undergrowth. He barely has a moment to react as the creature thunders past, scattering the smaller forest denizens in its wake. He crouches low in the brush, watching as a pack of young forest wolves effortlessly brings down a swift rabbit. He realizes that even though they are juveniles, their pack tactics make them lethal hunters, far more dangerous than they appear individually. This cycle of predation is a remnant of an ancient era, a time when gods and demon gods clashed in a war that ended only in a bitter stalemate. In their final moments of spite, the demon gods unleashed a curse upon the earth, birthing the monsters that now plague the land from the very soil. To counter this darkness, the gods used their remaining strength to forge dungeons as prisons for these beasts and bestowed upon humanity the gift, a mysterious power to defend the surface. From this divine legacy, the Adventurers Guild and its rigid ranking system were born to manage those who would venture into the depths. Yet, while the Guild's true purpose is to thin the ranks of dungeon monsters to prevent them from overflowing, he finds himself on a much humbler path. Instead of glory or combat, he spends his days gathering medicinal herbs, likely the only adventurer in the realm relegated to such menial labor just to survive. He sits alone in the shadows, gnawing on a piece of monster remains, a grim reminder of his unique but seemingly useless ability. His gift, known as Monster Eater, allows him to consume any part of a creature without falling ill, a talent he considers a complete dud as he questions how much longer he can sustain this pathetic existence. Forcing down another garbage meal to save on food expenses, he can't help but feel a wave of self-loathing. He considers it shameful to be an adventurer who spends his time sneaking through the undergrowth, running away from even the weakest F-rank monsters instead of facing them. His internal lament is suddenly shattered by a piercing scream for help echoing through the trees. He snaps his head toward the sound, his eyes widening in shock as the desperate cry of a woman cuts through the heavy forest silence. He rushes toward the source only to find a young woman cowering before a massive, snarling adult forest wolf. Unlike the juveniles he saw earlier, this beast is a towering engine of destruction, and the girl's terrified pleas for help hang heavy in the air as the predator prepares to strike. He watches in horror as the girl screams, her face contorted in terror while the massive beast closes the distance with a predatory leap. Desperate to help, he scans the area for other adventurers, cursing his luck for having a gift that offers no help in a fight. The girl's plea for help echoes through the trees, her eyes squeezed shut as she prays for a savior to appear. He suddenly lunges forward, shouting for her to get up and run, but the wolf is already upon them, its claws tearing through the air. As he reaches her side, she winces in pain, apologizing through tears because an injury to her leg has left her unable to flee. The beast doesn't wait, charging at him with a ferocious snarl that leaves him paralyzed with the realization of his own mortality. Teeth sink deep into his flesh, and in the searing agony, his mind flashes through unfulfilled promises and the bitter unfairness of dying in an F-rank dungeon. Refusing to let it end this way, he sinks his own teeth into the wolf's neck with a desperate cry to devour his foe. Instantly, a strange power surges through him as he acquires the monster's great fawn. He knelt on the forest floor, his mind reeling from the sudden, ethereal voice echoing in his head. It was the unmistakable resonance of a divine message, the phenomenon said to occur only when a gift truly awakens, yet the timing felt impossible. As the beast continued its low, menacing growl, the young woman behind him called out in concern, asking if he could still stand. He managed a strained reply, though his body felt heavy and the situation remained dire. Despite his exhaustion, he lunged forward with his knife, but the blade was a mere toy against the creature's savage strength. The wolf easily parried the strike with its own lethal fangs, sending him back as the realization sank in that his current weapon was utterly useless. In that moment of desperation, the words of the divine message returned to him with clarity. By biting the wolf, he had acquired its very essence. He understood now that he possessed something far harder and more lethal than any steel blade. The forest wolf's great fawn. With a surge of newfound resolve, he called upon his gift, and a massive, jagged fang materialized in his hand. The weight of the monster's own power felt strange, yet empowering as he prepared to turn the predator's strength against him. He struck with a single decisive blow, the conjured fang tearing through the wolf's hide and ending the struggle in a spray of dark blood. As the beast fell, he stood breathless, barely able to believe that he had actually emerged victorious. The silence of the forest returned as the young woman approached him, her eyes wide with relief as she checked on his wounded leg. He assured her he was all right, acknowledging that her presence had given him the chance he needed to survive. She offered him a bright, genuine smile and thanked him from the bottom of her heart for saving her life. For the first time in his career as an adventurer, he felt the warmth of true gratitude, a feeling far more rewarding than any treasure. The young woman watches him with admiration, struck by the sheer power he displayed. He introduces himself as Essen, though he adds a self-deprecating title, the eternal last place, wondering if she recognizes the infamous moniker. She introduces herself as Yua, offering a sheepish apology for her lack of experience. She explains that her transition into the life of an adventurer is a very recent development. He listens as she speaks, then begins to explain the nature of their world's divine system. He notes that different gods grant different boons. Those who follow the god of travel become adventurers, gaining the gifts necessary to brave dungeons. He reveals his own humble origins, admitting that he was once a simple farmer before business brought him to this forest. Continuing his lesson, he describes how merchants and farmers seek the favor of the gods of wealth and agriculture respectively. Yua can only marvel at the difficulty of the profession, concluding that if someone of his caliber is considered the bottom of the barrel, the life of an adventurer must be incredibly demanding. He looks down at his hands, confessing that the feat she witnessed was actually the very first time he had successfully manifested his gift. The revelation leaves her stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief at the timing of his breakthrough. As they sit amidst the quiet of the woods, he reflects on his long-standing misunderstanding of his own power. He had always assumed the Monster Eater gift simply granted him a stomach capable of digesting anything, but he now realizes the true essence of the ability lies in the consumption of the monsters themselves. He recounts the specific moment of activation, explaining that it was the act of consuming the forest wolf's tongue that finally triggered the divine power within him. He ponders the mechanics further, noting that neither cooked meat nor scavenged raw scraps had ever elicited a response from his gift before. He theorizes that the meat might need to be consumed while the creature is still fresh or even alive. Yua helps him piece it together, suggesting that the gift doesn't grant him the physical part he eats, but rather the unique essence or ability of the beast itself. He stares at his hand, a spark of hope igniting as he realizes the true potential of his gift to make him stronger. However, the moment of reflection is interrupted when Yua, sitting nearby, recalls his earlier mention of having business in this forest and asks for clarification. The young man's expression quickly shifts to one of self-doubt, as he mutters that someone perpetually in last place like himself likely can't accomplish much. Yua begins to protest his low self-esteem, but he cuts her off with a self-deprecating laugh, admitting that he might be getting ahead of himself with such grand thoughts. Sensing a shift in the atmosphere, she looks at him with a newfound intensity, her hands clasped tightly against her chest. She tentatively calls his name, acknowledging the boldness of her request after he had already saved her, before finally gathering the courage to ask him for a favor. She looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes, asking if he could defeat a forest cat for her. The request left him stunned, the name of the beast hanging heavy in the air as he repeated it in disbelief. Because of his hesitation, she quickly explained that a mushroom growing on the creature's head was the only cure for her mother's infectious disease. He recoiled, realizing she was asking him to face the strongest monster in the forest, a feat far beyond his current strength, and he desperately tried to process the impossibility of the task. The young man stood in silence, the weight of her desperation clashing with the reality of his own limitations as they stood amidst the quiet trees. Finally, he forced the words out, admitting with a heavy heart that he simply couldn't do it, his gaze dropping in shame. He continued, explaining that he wasn't ready for such a powerful foe and that his earlier success had been nothing more than luck and instinct. Hearing this, she could only offer a soft, understanding acknowledgement of his honesty, though her disappointment was palpable. She managed a sad, fragile smile, apologizing for placing such a burden on him before turning to walk away, leaving him standing alone with his guilt. As she departed, a mysterious woman with long, flowing hair and an ornate white outfit appeared behind him, her voice cold as she questioned if he was truly satisfied with letting the girl go. Meanwhile, the girl moved through the woods, her mind set on finding a way to save her mother despite the danger. He called out her name, just as she was startled by a sudden, ominous presence in the brush. She stops as he calls out to her, his voice cutting through the rustle of the forest. He rushes forward, urging her to wait. Having caught up, he declares his intention to defeat the forest cat, despite his own uncertainty. She immediately protests, guilt-ridden that her selfish request has put him in such grave danger. He cuts her off, his expression hardening with a newfound resolve. He confesses that he has long used his innate gift as a shield to avoid challenges, but he is determined to stop running and face this trial head-on. The young man explains that if he fails to act now, the person he admires most would surely look down on him. With a firm gaze, he asks her to find a safe place to wait while he handles the beast. Overwhelmed by his bravery, she can no longer hold back her tears. The weight of his sacrifice for her sake leaves her speechless and deeply moved. As he disappears into the dense foliage, her soft voice follows him, offering a heartfelt thanks that echoes through the quiet woods. She stands alone, realizing that despite his outward strength, he must be just as terrified as she is. The fact that he accepted such a dangerous task, despite his fear, only deepens her respect for him. Refusing to remain a passive observer, she decides that she cannot simply rely on him for everything. She begins to scan the area, searching for any way she might be able to assist him in the coming struggle. While she remained behind, Essen approached the heart of the forest, finding the jagged entrance to a hidden cavern. Inside the shadows, a massive, furred presence stirred. The creature, known as the forest cat, rose with a slow, predatory grace. It possessed a crown of bone atop its head and a long, armored tail that twitched with lethal intent. Facing the beast, he declared that after 4 years of venturing into this dungeon, he finally knew its lair. He understood that his path to a higher rank was blocked by this single predator, and with a surge of resolve, he prepared for the fight. With a sudden burst of speed, the young adventurer launched his first strike wing technique, lunging forward with his blade held low. However, the strike met only empty air as the monster vanished from his sight. He looked around in frantic confusion, unable to track the creature's movement. Before he could react, the beast reappeared in a blur of motion, its sheer speed forcing him onto the defensive. A powerful blow sent him tumbling across the cavern floor, his boots scraping against the stone as he struggled to regain his footing. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he realized the true scale of the threat. The monster's speed was beyond anything he had anticipated, and its claws had the power to rend the very earth. As the predator leaped into the air for another strike, he braced himself, knowing that his usual tactics would not be enough to survive this encounter. He gritted his teeth, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth as he realized that even with his fangs bared, he was hopelessly outmatched. Across the clearing, the forest cat let out a mocking cry, its movements a blur of predatory grace. Frustration boiled over as he was tossed around like a rag doll, realizing the beast was merely toying with him. It seemed to accelerate with every passing second, its claws leaving trails of light in the air as he struggled to even track its position. A massive shock wave sent him reeling, his mind racing to reconcile the creature's overwhelming power with its supposed F-rank status. This wasn't a hunt. It was a slaughter, and he was the prey. Slumped against the cold earth, he desperately searched for a weakness, a way to bridge the gap in speed that threatened to end his journey here. Just as despair began to take root, a familiar voice cut through the chaos, calling his name. He looked up in shock to see Yua leaping into the danger zone, her face set with a determination that matched his own surprise. She hadn't come empty-handed, dragging a dazed forest rabbit along with her in a frantic attempt to provide some kind of assistance. She explained breathlessly that she wanted to help him, even as the rabbit's eyes spun in its head from the rough handling. The young adventurer caught the plump creature as it was tossed toward him, its long ears flopping uselessly as he held it tight. Looking at the rabbit, a plan began to form. It was a creature renowned for its incredible leg strength, exactly what he needed. He prayed that his unique gift would grant him that power rather than just a pair of oversized ears as he prepared to make his move. He lunges forward, the desperate gamble with the forest rabbit beginning as he consumes its essence to survive the onslaught. With a quick word of thanks to Yua, the transformation takes hold. A surge of power courses through him as he acquires the swift legs of the rabbit, allowing him to move with such blinding speed that he becomes a blur of motion across the battlefield, leaving only trails of dust in his wake. This newfound agility allows him to close the distance instantly, delivering a devastating blow that tears through the forest cat's defenses in a spray of blood. The beast falls, its reign of terror ended by the young man who now stands amidst the aftermath, his face partially obscured by a dark, predatory shadow as the adrenaline begins to fade. Standing over the fallen predator, he offers a grim word of thanks for the meal that granted him victory. Nearby, Yua watches in stunned silence, her eyes wide as she processes the sheer intensity of the battle she just witnessed. Her shock quickly turns to exuberant joy, and she throws herself at him in a celebratory hug, praising his incredible feat. She can hardly believe he actually defeated the forest cat, while he is caught off guard by the sudden physical affection, stammering in embarrassment as he tries to process her excitement. As the excitement settles, she curiously inquires about the specific gift he managed to claim from the defeated forest cat. He looks down at his own hand, a strange sensation tingling in his fingertips. As the realization of his new power takes hold, his fingers elongate into lethal, razor-sharp claws, confirming that he has indeed inherited the cat's most dangerous weapon. He stares at the lethal claws now extending from his fingertips, admitting that this new power is difficult to manage. Yua watches him with a mix of awe and concern, noting that the title of Monster Eater truly suits him now. With a swift, precise motion, the sharp claws are put to practical use, effortlessly slicing through a large mushroom. Handing over the promised prize, he expresses his deep gratitude, insisting that the victory would have been impossible without her help. She accepts the mushroom with a bashful smile, though he remains determined to repay her properly one day. As they prepare to part ways, she promises to keep his unique ability a secret, recognizing that most people view monsters only as enemies, and his gift could lead to him being ostracized. He thanks her again, urging her to return safely to her mother as they share a final, friendly exchange. Walking away into the vast wilderness, he reflects on his long-standing reputation as the eternal last place. Despite the weight of that title, a new sense of purpose fills him. He feels as though he has finally reached the true starting line of his journey as an adventurer, with his thoughts drifting toward Polaris. Far beyond the immediate horizon, in a land of fire and ice dominated by the massive skull of a fallen titan, other powerful figures continue their own quests. He knows that many formidable adventures await him in the world outside his village. Clenching his fist with newfound resolve, he looks toward the future with a confident grin. The path ahead is long, but his goal is clear. He will climb the ranks until he stands at the very top. The invisible gears of the world's social order shift in response to his recent deeds. His standing among the masses begins its ascent, jumping from the depths of rank 96,743 up to an even 90,000. A heavy, armored boot thuds onto the stone, signaling the arrival of someone formidable. The crowd nearby recoils in shock, their eyes wide as they witness the sudden appearance. Among them, the young adventurer and his companion look on, stunned by the sheer presence of the newcomer. She strides forward, the Ice Princess Polari, her reputation preceding her as whispers ripple through the gathered throng. The onlookers are incredulous, noting her swift return from the volcano of destruction, a feat deemed nearly impossible even for the most seasoned air-rank veterans. Nearby, a frantic group scrambles over the ranking boards, panicked by the sudden disappearance of a name that had been there only yesterday. Polari's gaze shifts to the top of the list, where the ninth position is displayed, and she reflects on the immense difficulty of ascending through these elite tiers. A man with a smug grin interrupts the tension, dismissing the missing name as an inconsequential weakling from the lower ranks. He casually explains the harsh reality of their world. A name only vanishes from the records if an adventurer chooses to retire or if they meet their end. He then turns his attention to Polari, offering a shallow compliment on her appearance and suggesting they ignore the commoners to share some tea. She remains stoic, her sharp eyes showing no interest in his advances or his dismissive attitude toward others. Undeterred, he boasts of his own status as the 73rd ranked adventurer, proposing that a partnership between them would be mutually beneficial. She doesn't even hesitate, rejecting the offer with a cold finality that leaves no room for negotiation. Her gaze hardens as she delivers a blunt truth, stating that the only reason he desires her strength is because he is fundamentally weaker than she is. The insult stings, and he recoils, labeling her a battle-obsessed maniac who hides behind the power of her innate gift. Ignoring his outburst, she turns away, her focus already shifting back to the path ahead. She stares in disbelief, her pupils constricted as a cold realization washes over her. Looking up at the massive ranking board, she searches frantically for a specific name, only to find a glaring void where it once stood. The impossibility of the situation gnaws at her. Essen, the boy known for his stubborn persistence, has vanished from the list entirely. She knows he isn't the type to simply give up, which makes his absence all the more unsettling. Her gaze fixes on the very bottom of the list, where the title of 90,000th place, the absolute lowest rank, is now occupied by a different name. The reality that he has finally moved from that stagnant position sends a jolt of shock through her. Without a word, she turns on her heel and strides away, her cloak fluttering behind her as she processes this sudden shift in the established order. Meanwhile, the young man who caused such a stir wore the look of quiet, focused determination, his eyes bright with a newfound sense of purpose. He stands before the public records, a triumphant shout erupting from his lungs as he celebrates a milestone long in the making. For the boy who had been defined by his status as the very last, this is the first definitive step toward a new future. His sudden outburst draws the bewildered stares of the other adventurers in the crowded hall, who pause their own business to wonder if he has finally lost his mind. He ignores their skepticism, beaming with pride as he announces that his ranking has finally increased. His companions remain unimpressed, reminding him of his long-standing reputation as the eternal last place. But their mockery does nothing to dampen his infectious enthusiasm. He remains humbled despite the skepticism of those around him. They question his methods, suggesting that rising in rank by merely defeating a few monsters is nothing to brag about, especially since he remains at the very bottom of the ladder. Because of their dismissive attitude, he can only offer a strained smile. They continue to needle him, theorizing that his slight ascent was likely just the result of surpassing adventurers who had long since retired or become inactive. As the group departs, they warn him that a single achievement won't change his reputation and that such outbursts will hinder his progress. He takes the criticism in stride, thanking them for the reality check and promising to redouble his efforts without letting this small success go to his head. Moments later, he discusses his future plans with a fellow adventurer, explaining that the nature of his unique gift requires him to explore a wide variety of dungeons, though his experience thus far has been limited to a single location. Seeking professional guidance, he approaches the reception desk, where a cheerful woman named Iruru greets him warmly, offering her assistance with a bright smile. Unlike the rough adventurers he usually deals with, he finds the guild staff to be remarkably refined and kind. He requests recommendations for an E-rank dungeon, hoping to find a suitable challenge for his current level. While she prepares the information, he finds himself struck by her pleasant demeanor and the subtle fragrance she carries, noting that the rumors of the staff's beauty and grace were well-founded. To his surprise, she recognizes him immediately, noting that his reputation as the eternal last place has made him quite well-known. She admits her shock at seeing his name move on the ranking boards that morning and expresses genuine happiness that his persistence is finally yielding results. She receives his heartfelt thanks as he prepares to depart, his face lighting up with a genuine smile at her unexpected kindness. Before he can leave, she leans across the counter with a sudden, intense proximity, warning him that the moment one prepares to step forward is exactly when they're most vulnerable to carelessness. He acknowledges the wisdom in her words with a determined nod, and she responds with a warm, supportive smile as they shift their focus to the task at hand, selecting his next destination from the guild's extensive records. She begins detailing the various locales, pointing out the Cemetery of Rest for its predictable undead inhabitants and the Wandering Cave for its rare but dangerous treasures, all while he carefully weighs the risks of each. He scans the options, expressing a desire for a less crowded path and a particular distaste for the idea of facing or consuming the undead, prompting her to search for a more suitable alternative. She suggests the Rainy Wetlands, a desolate landscape of stagnant pools and jagged rocks that immediately catches his attention as he reviews the provided documentation. She explains that the area's lack of popularity means less competition for resources, and since the materials found there are currently in high demand, the payout would be substantial. He expresses his sincere gratitude for her guidance before heading out, leaving her with a cheerful wave as she offers a final wish for his success. He approached the massive, rune-etched barrier that marked the entrance to his destination, the scale of the ancient structure dwarfing his lone figure as he crossed the threshold. As he moved beyond the gate, his boots sank into the soft, yielding earth, the squelch of mud signaling a change in terrain. Emerging into the open air, the young adventurer took in the sight of the rainy wetlands, an E-rank dungeon characterized by its stagnant pools and sparse vegetation. He observed the landscape with a mix of curiosity and caution, noting the dampness that permeated everything. Stepping deeper into the marsh, he felt the cold water seep into his footwear, a grimace crossing his face as he realized exactly why this place was so unpopular among his peers. Despite the discomfort, he set to work, harvesting rare flora he had never seen before and stowing them away in his new magic bag, a tool with an expanded internal space he had acquired through trade. He felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that with this enchanted satchel, he could gather far more than his hands could carry. Suddenly, a wetland frog lunged from the murky water, its long tongue lashing out like a whip. Though it was considered the weakest inhabitant of the dungeon, its venomous nature made it a persistent nuisance that required a swift response. The creature, realizing it was outmatched, attempted to hop away into the tall grass, prompting him to call out in a futile attempt to stop its retreat. Later, having secured a meal, he bit into a piece of monster meat, his mind focused on the necessity of expanding his unique gift while acknowledging that, despite the damp conditions, his progress was going remarkably well. He finishes his unusual meal with a satisfied lick of his lips, offering a polite word of thanks for the sustenance. Immediately, a surge of power resonates within him as he successfully acquires a new ability, the wetland frog's whip tongue. Essen suddenly clutches his neck, his eyes widening in shock as a sharp, stinging sensation flares up. The pain intensifies into a searing heat, forcing a silent scream from his lungs as his throat feels like it's being consumed by fire. He collapses to his knees, gasping for air that won't come, realizing with mounting dread that the poison is far more potent than he anticipated. Desperate, he fumbles for a vial and downs the contents, the antidote finally dulling the agony. He wipes his mouth, reflecting on his near-fatal mistake. His monster eater gift has its limits, and Iruru's warnings about the dangers of E-rank monsters were far from exaggerated. He realizes that even with his unique ability, he cannot afford to be overconfident. With the immediate danger past, he sits amidst the desolate wetlands, the carcass of the frog serving as a grim reminder of the cost of carelessness. He consults his notes, acknowledging that without any more antidotes, he must prioritize finding prey that isn't venomous. He needs to grow stronger, but he must be tactical about which abilities he seeks to acquire next, aiming for powerful traits while avoiding opponents that are currently beyond his reach. His internal planning is cut short when something catches his eye across the marshy expanse, causing him to tense up. Across the marsh, he spots a wetland lizard prowling nearby and identifies it as the perfect target. It lacks poison and offers the promise of defensive scale-based skills. He readies himself, knowing that in this environment, the one who strikes first claims the prize. He lashes out with his newly acquired power, the wetland frog's whip tongue, snaring the lizard's neck in a sudden, sticky grip. The creature's weight is more than he anticipated, and as he pulls, the lizard digs its claws into the earth, resisting the tether. Realizing the beast's hide is far tougher than he imagined, Essen struggles to find a weakness. He decides that if his weapons cannot pierce the scales, he will use his own monstrous fangs to bite down and force the creature into submission. As the life fades from his prey, a surge of power courses through him, signaling the acquisition of the wetland lizard's blade tail. He stands transformed, a lethal, scaly tail now whipping behind him as he feels his physical strength reach new heights. Two more of the reptiles emerge from the brush with aggressive hisses, but Essen merely smiles at the challenge. He declares his intent to defeat them properly, noting that their valuable tails will fetch a handsome price at the guild. He dives into the fray with newfound speed, finding a dark joy in the heat of combat. As he strikes, he reflects on how every monster he consumes bolsters his raw power and his unique gift, making him feel stronger with every passing second. With a fluid motion, he swings his bladed tail, carving through the lizards with a precision and lethality he never possessed before. He delivers a final, devastating blow, the blade-like tail slicing through the creature with surgical precision. As the monster collapses, its body split by the force of a strike, he watches with a cold, focused intensity, ensuring the threat is truly neutralized. With the battle finally over, he wipes the blood from his face and surveys the impressive haul of materials he gathered, including rare eggs and meat. Satisfied that the day's work has been more productive than expected, he decides to call it a day and head back. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the bustling town, he returns to civilization, blending into the evening crowd. He walks with a light step, humming a tune as he calculates the profit from his spoils. The thought of buying high-quality meat for dinner and stocking up on essential materials for his future adventures brings a satisfied smile to his face. However, a sudden, cool breeze against his skin makes him pause. He realizes with a start that the powerful tail skill he used earlier has completely shredded the seat of his trousers. He tries to cover himself in desperation, realizing the absurdity of his situation and the dire need to find a clothing shop immediately. The thought of being seen in such a state by someone he knows fills him with a sense of impending doom. Just as he attempts to sneak away, the sharp click of a heel on the pavement stops him cold, and a familiar voice calls out his name, catching him at the worst possible moment. He froze, the sound of his name cutting through the air like a blade. The voice was unmistakable, a ghost from his past that he never expected to encounter here, especially not in his current, disheveled state. Emerging from the crowd, she offered a soft word of congratulations. It was Polaris, her presence as commanding and ethereal as ever, standing in stark contrast to the dusty streets of the lower district. She continued, noting that she had seen his ranking finally move upward. While he struggled to find words, his face flushed with a mix of shame and disbelief, she watched him with a calm, knowing smile. As they stood amidst the bustle of the town, she acknowledged that while she didn't know the details of his journey, it was clear his persistence was finally yielding results. He turned away, his mind racing with questions. A high-ranking adventurer like her had no business in this part of the city. He had convinced himself she had long since forgotten him, and the realization that she hadn't made his current situation feel all the more humiliating. Then, she made an offer that left him speechless, asking him to join her and form a party. Overwhelmed by the weight of the moment and the gap between them, he could only hide his face, his voice trembling as he initially tried to decline. Steeling himself, he looked her in the eye and gave a firm refusal. He stood his ground. The distance between their social standings felt like a physical chasm between them in the open street. He admitted that while joining her would undoubtedly skyrocket his rank and prestige, it was a path he simply couldn't take, his hand clenching into a fist as he prioritized his own difficult journey over an easy ascent. He clenches his fist, his voice steady as he explains that while his pride might be selfish and petty, he refuses to be the kind of adventurer who takes the easy way up. He is determined to reach the top through his own strength. Hearing this, she can't help but smile, remarking on how he hasn't changed a bit and calling his stubbornness truly selfish. As she stands surrounded by the shadows of her elite peers, the weight of her position is clear, yet her focus remains entirely on the man before her. Nearby, the other adventurers who had been watching the exchange react with a mix of surprise and understanding, realizing the depth of the bond and the resolve shared between the two. Her gaze softens, and with a quiet intensity, she makes a promise to herself and to him. With a radiant, genuine smile, she declares that she will be waiting for him at the summit, fully believing in his potential to get there. He offers a casual wave over his shoulder as he walks away, a gesture of farewell that she meets with a lingering, affectionate look. Returning to the familiar bustle of the lower district, he moves with a renewed sense of purpose, his expression bright as he prepares to continue his arduous journey from the bottom. He moves through the bustling street with a newfound energy, accidentally colliding with a passerby in his haste. After a quick apology, he clenches his fist, his spirit ignited by his recent conversation with Polaris. He declares to himself that it is time to prepare for the challenges of the coming day, feeling a massive surge of motivation. The man he brushed against, a high-ranking adventurer draped in an ornate, fur-lined cape, pauses to adjust his metallic gauntlets and settle his gear. He watches the retreating figure with a knowing, slightly condescending smile, quietly acknowledging the interaction as he continues on his way. High above the city, the clouds drift lazily across the vast expanse of the sky as a polite request breaks the afternoon air. Within the quiet confines of a local clothier, the young adventurer stands before a counter lined with various garments. He addresses the shopkeeper directly, his needs humble and practical as he requests a single pair of pants to replace his worn travel gear. Polari stands amidst the craggy peaks of the A-rank dungeon, Thunder Peak, facing down a massive horned beast. With a sharp cry, she lunges forward, her blade ready to strike. She weaves her magic into the fray, unleashing a searing ice burn, followed by a barrage of icicle lances that pierce through the ranks of the encroaching monsters. The warrior's determination manifests in a colossal spire of ice that erupts from the ground, shattering the surrounding terrain and freezing everything in its path. She maneuvers with lethal grace, narrowly avoiding a jagged bolt of lightning that tears through the frozen air as the dungeon itself seems to rebel against her presence. The ice mage finds herself face to face with a massive lightning worm, its glowing body coiling through the air, but she remains undeterred, preparing her next devastating spell. She calls upon the power of the frozen star to unleash permafrost, a wave of absolute zero that halts the endless tide of monsters. She notes that over 20 have fallen already, a grim reality of the dungeon's flood season. The heroine later stands in a quiet, snow-covered village, where the residents offer their heartfelt thanks for her yearly efforts in calming the monster's rage. She dismisses their praise, claiming no interest in the creature's ecology, only in the necessity of their defeat. The village remains peaceful under the twilight sky, the silence of the snow-dusted buildings serving as a quiet testament to the battle she just concluded. He stands at the edge of a dusty crossroads, watching a horse-drawn carriage prepare for departure. Though he had promised to wait, the restless energy within him makes standing still an impossibility. A week has passed since his reunion with Polaris, a time he spent honing his skills in the treacherous rainy wetlands. Now, feeling the call of the horizon, he approaches a driver to secure passage to the port town of Liable, eager to venture further into the unknown. Stepping into the cramped interior of the carriage, he is met with the heavy silence of another passenger already seated in the shadows. The wooden floorboards groan under his weight as he settles in for the long journey ahead. The stranger's eyes narrow as they recognize him, a mocking smirk playing on his lips as he utters the derogatory title, Eternal Last Place. He remains stoic, though the recognition from such a high-ranking adventurer is unexpected. Ignoring his cold reception, the man introduces himself as Keith with an air of unearned superiority. He barely acknowledges the name, his lack of interest only fueling the other man's arrogance. Watching him, the young warrior contemplates the vast gap in their official standings, noting that Keith holds the 73rd rank. However, the old labels no longer carry the same weight. He knows he's grown far beyond the bottom of the ladder. Under his silent observation, the high-ranking adventurer leans forward, his sharp gaze scrutinizing the worn state of his gear and the quiet intensity of his presence. He questions whether an E-rank could truly possess such an aura, sensing a strength that contradicts the boy's lowly status. He continues his condescending lecture, leaning back with a smirk as he dismisses his own advice as something meant only for those weak enough to retreat. With a sharp look, he warns his companion not to associate him with the derogatory title of the Eternal Last Place, making it clear he considers himself far superior to such a reputation. In response, the young man's jaw tightens, his frustration evident in the set of his mouth. He demands an end to the use of that mocking moniker, his patience finally wearing thin under the constant belittlement. He stands firm, his eyes burning with a newfound intensity as he clearly states his true identity, asserting that his name is Essen and nothing else. The high-ranking adventurer merely chuckles at the outburst, finding the display of spirit more amusing than threatening. He mockingly twists the name into a new insult, Pessin, and challenges the youth to prove he has the strength to actually rise above his lowly status, his tone dripping with skepticism. Undeterred, Essen fires back with a fierce grin, declaring that he will demonstrate his worth regardless of the other's skepticism. Even as he speaks, a part of him realizes he has no real obligation to prove himself to this stranger. Yet the fire of competition has already been lit, and he is determined to silence the man's mockery. As the tension in the carriage simmers, the landscape outside shifts, revealing the stone walls and shimmering waters of a coastal destination. The driver calls out to his passengers, announcing their arrival at the port. Inside, the two unlikely companions prepare to disembark, the weight of their earlier exchange still hanging in the air. Bursting with energy, the youth leaps from the carriage, his arms raised in excitement as he takes in the sights of a place he has never seen before. Behind him, the older adventurer watches with a weary sigh, commenting on the boy's childish enthusiasm, though the young man simply counters that his lack of travel experience makes this moment truly special. He lets out a gasp of pure wonder, his eyes widening as he takes in the sight before him. Standing atop the stone embankment overlooking the vast expanse, he can't contain his excitement and shouts out to the endless blue horizon. Behind him, the smug adventurer calls out using that irritating nickname, prompting the young man to turn back with a patient, if slightly weary, smile. The conversation turns to their immediate plans as the veteran questions if he's heading straight for the dungeon, earning a sharp correction regarding his name and a playful threat of being knocked out in return. While the higher-ranked man boasts about his leisure and plans to start his conquest the following day, the youth remains focused, countering that unlike his companion, he intends to at least scout the area immediately. As the waves crash violently against the jagged rocks of the coast, a quiet realization settles in. He has certainly encountered an unusual individual in this new town. The path leads him to the mouth of a cavernous opening where the sea air is thick, officially designated as the E-rank dungeon, known as the Roaring Reef. Standing at the threshold of the dark grotto, he observes the crashing surf and prepares himself to face whatever challenges this new location holds. He stands before the desolate, rocky coast, recalling the advice given by the guild receptionist. She had pointed him toward this overlooked location, and he relishes the opportunity to hone his abilities without interference, eager to see what new skills he might claim for himself. Tightening his gloves with a determined grip, the young adventurer considers the practical benefits of the task ahead. Beyond the training, the subjugation requests offer a welcome chance to earn some extra coin for his travels. He reviews the details of the mission, understanding the gravity of these unpopular dungeons. When monster populations spiral out of control, they threaten to shatter the magical barriers and spill into the surrounding lands in a catastrophic event known as an overflow. To prevent such disasters, the guild offers high rewards for those willing to cull the creatures, and today, his target is a trio of leaf crabs. Stepping into the shallow, churning waters, he is haunted by a childhood memory of a neighboring village nearly wiped out by a similar monster surge. The sight of the hard-shelled creatures skittering across the rocks confirms that the threat is very real. While he dodges a lunge from one of the beast's massive pincers, he realizes that his duty goes beyond mere rankings or gold. He resolves to take on these vital tasks more often, driven by a newfound sense of responsibility to protect the innocent from such tragedies. He strikes back with a powerful blow, but the impact vibrates up his arm as his weapon meets the creature's incredibly dense shell. He notes the surprising resilience of the beast, yet he presses the attack, determined to clear the reef of the encroaching threat. The adventurer lunges forward, his blade striking the hard shell of the creature with a resounding metallic clang. Because of this sudden display of force, the monster reels back in shock, its single eye wide with disbelief at the sheer power behind an E-rank attack. Essen merely smirks, noting that he has grown accustomed to being underestimated by his foes. He continues his assault, recalling that the primary weaknesses of crustacean monsters are their soft underbellies and their sluggish forward and backward movement. With a swift, calculated maneuver, he flips the beast onto its back, rendering it completely helpless. Despite its vulnerability, the shell at the base of its legs remains incredibly tough, forcing him to exert significant effort to pry it open. Eventually, he succeeds, pulling out a massive, succulent piece of white meat that glistens in the light. Upon tasting the harvest, he is overwhelmed by the firm, elastic texture and a natural sweetness that perfectly complements the seed-derived saltiness. The rich aroma of the broth fills his senses, and he can't help but smile at the sheer deliciousness of the monster meat. This culinary revelation sparks a strange thought. Could he actually dominate this field? He envisions himself standing confidently amidst the kitchen of giant utensils and exotic ingredients, a master of monster cuisine. In this fleeting daydream, he even imagines a future where he and Polaris run a high-end establishment together, serving legendary dishes like A-rank volcano dragon roast to adoring customers. However, he quickly shakes the thought from his head, shouting at his own wandering mind. He reminds himself firmly that his ultimate goal is not to climb the ranks of the restaurant world, but something far different. He walks away from the coast, his mind heavy with the realization that his lack of conviction might forever keep him from reaching the same heights as the woman he admires. Upon reaching the town's outskirts, he decides that finding a place to rest is his first priority. He follows the enticing aroma of hot soup to the entrance of the Coral Inn, hoping the rates are as welcoming as the smell. As he steps through the door and arranges a 3-day stay with the cheerful staff, he spots a familiar, boisterous figure holding court in the dining area. There, Keith is busy impressing a young boy with exaggerated tales of his exploits, pointing to his scars as evidence of his supposed title, Keith of the Scorching Sun. The boastful man catches sight of him and immediately labels him a late-arriving underling, a comment that earns him a look of pure exasperation. While the child gazes at the strongest adventurer with wide-eyed admiration, the rest of the group settles in for their evening meal. Unable to stay silent, he confronts the braggart about the tall tales he's spinning for the boy, only to be dismissed with a smug remark about their vast difference in rank. He stands there, enduring a barrage of condescending questions about his status. Keith mocks his lack of a title and his abysmal ranking, which sits somewhere around 76,000. The disparity between them is laid bare, a gap so wide it seems insurmountable. He clenches his fist in silent frustration, listening as the higher-ranked adventurer dismisses his efforts and scoffs at the idea of hard work, telling him that if he wants to lecture anyone, he needs to surpass him first. He continues his verbal assault, leaning in with a voice dripping with disdain. He suggests that a recent, lucky rise in rank has made the younger man cocky, reminding him that he was once nothing more than a fool who laughed off every insult with a mindless grin. He doubles down on his disdain, claiming that he simply despises the true nature of someone who lacks any real achievements to back up their presence, while the younger man can only stare back in silence, his jaw tight. He is left in a heavy silence as the arrogant warrior turns and strides away without another word, while the young boy who had been watching the exchange remains, his eyes wide as he observes the aftermath. He collapses onto the bed later, back in the solitude of his room at the inn, staring at the ceiling in a fit of self-loathing. He curses his inability to find the words to defend himself, but his brooding is interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. He watches as the door swings open to reveal the same boy from the common room, who introduces himself as Nick. With a bright, helpful smile, the child explains that his father runs the establishment and asks if there's anything he needs. He sits up and softens his expression, introducing himself as Essen. When Nick asks if he'd like breakfast prepared, he realizes the boy is just trying to be helpful and offers a small, appreciative nod. He listens as the boy shares his dreams, a faint smile touching his lips as he recalls his own younger days. The lad explains his plan to save every coin for a proper sword, intending to conquer dungeons once he is finally armed. Seeing that spark of ambition, the adventurer realizes he cannot afford to stagnate either. Nearby, the boy vigorously practices his swings, declaring his intent to quickly surpass those he considers beneath him, including his current mentor. The youth lunges with his wooden practice weapon, but the seasoned warrior deflects the strike with ease, prompting a frustrated grunt from the boy. Despite the gap in skill, the child remains defiant, refusing to be bested by someone he views as a title-less, low-ranking wanderer. This relentless drive for status is the foundation of their world, where a simple number dictates a person's entire worth. In this rigid hierarchy, strength is the only currency, and those at the very pinnacle look down from heights that seem unreachable to the common man. As night falls and the moon hangs heavy over the quiet town, the weight of these ambitions lingers in the air. He stares into the darkness, making a silent, ironclad vow to one day rise above both his rivals and those who currently stand at the peak of the world. The quiet of the night eventually gives way to a crisp morning, marked only by the soft chirping of a bird perched upon a wooden fence. Later that day, he finishes a hearty meal at a local stall, offering his thanks to the cook before preparing to depart. As he stands, he notices a familiar, arrogant figure walking away into the bustling street. He calls out a final farewell to the shopkeeper while keeping his eyes fixed on the retreating back of the man he intends to surpass. With a wave and a polite word of parting, he sets off, the fire of competition burning brighter than ever. He is approached by the young boy, Nick, who asks to accompany him toward the dungeon. Though he remains aloof, telling the boy to do as he pleases, Nick offers a sincere thanks for the events of the previous day. As they walk, the boy admits he prefers this blunt treatment over being coddled, recognizing his own lack of experience. He responds with a smirk, claiming it is only natural for the strong to guide the weak, though the boy quickly clarifies that he didn't take the comment as advice. Their conversation is interrupted by the sight of several men struggling to load massive, bound creatures onto a heavy wooden cart. The sight leaves the boy bewildered, as he had never heard of monsters being captured alive before. He speculates that perhaps someone among the group possesses a rare hypnosis gift to keep the beasts subdued. They watch the cart rumble down the path, the boy realizing that live specimens are likely used as fresh ingredients and command a much higher price in the city. The two continue their journey along the rugged, sun-drenched coastline, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. Reaching a point where their paths must diverge, the boy announces he will head off on his own, noting that they are both solo adventurers. He agrees readily, pointing out that there is no tactical advantage to a partnership, though the boy still encourages him to call out if he finds himself in trouble. Watching the boy disappear into the distance, he turns his gaze back toward the sea, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips as he prepares to face the challenges ahead alone. While he was still making his way along the coast, the sounds of a fierce struggle erupted nearby as Keith engaged a massive leaf crab. The creature's central eye pulsed with a predatory light as it snapped its jagged pincers, forcing the high-ranked adventurer to strain against the sheer weight of its shell. He initially held his ground with a confident smirk, curious about the creature's capabilities, but the monster's strength was deceptive. In a sudden, violent burst of power, the crab's pincers slammed into the earth with enough force to shatter stone, revealing the terrifying lethality of its leaf star classification. The impact sent him reeling, his bravado replaced by a guttural scream of pain as the beast's true power was unleashed. His agonizing cries brought the young traveler running to the scene, calling out in desperate concern for his companion. When he finally reached the warrior, the sight that met him was chilling. The man stood trembling, his face pale with shock, as the boy looked down to see the adventurer's arm had been reduced to a blackened, charred ruin. Keith stands over the charred remains of the leaf crab, his eyes wide with disbelief as he recognizes the sheer power required to leave such a mark. He turns his gaze toward the young adventurer, realizing that it was indeed him who faced the beast, and remarks with a smug smirk that had they been opponents, the boy would have ended up just like the monster, burnt to a crisp. He observes the boy looking down at his own hand, the skin blackened and raw from the intensity of the struggle, while the youth wonders about the nature of the veteran's power. Even with his own unique abilities, the young man acknowledges that a direct assault on such a creature would have been impossible without a gift as destructive as the one he just witnessed. He consumes a fragment of the fallen creature, the act of eating it a grim necessity for his unique path as a monster eater. The sharp crunch echoes in the quiet aftermath of the battle as he seeks to recover his strength. He recalls the moment of impact, a vivid memory of the searing heat that reduced the monster's shell to ash in a heartbeat. The sheer violence of the incineration remains etched in his mind, a testament to the gap between their current levels of power. In response to his awe, the veteran ignites a swirling vortex of fire in his palm. Identifying his gift as Scorching Sunday, he explains with practiced ease that his power lies in the very creation of flames, a feat that leaves the younger man visibly stunned by its raw potential. He asks if the boy is jealous, claiming his gift is destined for the strongest, while the youth watches the flickering embers and realizes why the man carries himself with such arrogance. Elemental manipulation is a rare and versatile talent, a fact the older warrior is quick to exploit with a mocking grin. He remains silent as the man turns to leave with a dismissive wave, leaving him to contemplate his own scorched and aching hand. The encounter has left him with more questions than answers about the path he has chosen. The veteran pauses to question the logic of such a painful existence, calling it the burden of the powerful, while the younger man calculates the sheer inefficiency of his own recovery process. He thinks of the exorbitant cost of burn medicine and the waste of time spent waiting for his body to heal after every encounter, realizing the harsh reality of his current methods. He stood firm, his gaze fixed on the horizon as he repeated his vow to become the strongest adventurer. Essen watched him, silent, as the weight of that ambition hung in the air between them. The fire wielder's resolve was absolute. He knew that to reach the pinnacle, he had to embody that strength entirely. As they continued their trek along the winding mountain path, Keith offered a cold piece of wisdom, warning that no matter how much power one gains, sacrificing the body in exchange for strength will eventually lead to a hard, inescapable limit. This cynical outlook left Essen reeling, his mind racing as he questioned how Keith could ever hope to be the greatest while dismissing the very town they had just left as a lost cause. Their philosophical clash was abruptly interrupted by the sight of villagers fleeing in terror, their frantic cries about informing the travel god church echoing through the valley. Amidst the fleeing crowd, a familiar young face appeared, as Nick came sprinting toward them, his voice filled with desperate relief at finding the two adventurers. The boy was breathless, pointing back toward the port market and shouting for their help as the situation there spiraled out of control. Both men tensed as the child delivered the grim news. The market was in total chaos, overrun by a sudden and violent monster attack. He sprints alongside the young boy, their footsteps heavy against the stone as they race toward the source of the commotion. Nick shouts back to Keith, urging him to keep up, while simultaneously calling for his companion to hurry. Upon reaching the main thoroughfare, he skids to a halt, his eyes widening in disbelief at the devastation unfolding before him. The air is thick with the sounds of destruction, leaving him to wonder what could have possibly caused such a catastrophe. The street is a scene of pure pandemonium, with terrified citizens fleeing in every direction. Amidst the stampede, he and the boy stand their ground for a fleeting moment, surrounded by the wreckage of what was once a peaceful market. As they resume their pace, the boy explains the grim reality. Monsters intended for auction have broken free and are now rampaging through the city. The news hits him hard, the sheer recklessness of such an event leaving him momentarily stunned. Suddenly, a massive pillar of energy erupts into the sky from the direction of the port, its sheer power shaking the very foundations of the town. He watches in grim realization, fearing that this escalation is tied to the events of the morning. The boy points toward the port, shouting that they must hurry, but his own gaze is fixed on the towering inferno. He knows that a display of power this immense can only mean one thing. Keith has already engaged the threat. They plunge back into the fray, weaving through the panicked masses as they head straight for the heart of the disaster. Every second counts as the screams of the townspeople echo through the narrow alleys. A violent surge of wind and debris sweeps across the path, nearly knocking them off their feet. Seeing the scale of the magic being unleashed, he can only shout a desperate warning into the gale, pleading for his ally not to throw caution to the wind. He braced himself as the shockwave of his own power rippled outward, the countdown of his remaining strength ticking away in his mind as he struggled to maintain control. Standing amidst the smoldering remains of his foes, the warrior noted that 4 had fallen, though the blackened skin of his arm betrayed the heavy toll his magic was taking on his body. He surveyed the area, realizing that while he had successfully lured many of the escaped beasts to his position, others surely remained at large. Worse still, his supply of burn medicine was completely exhausted, leaving him to endure the searing pain of his overtaxed limbs. Nearby, more of the leaf-shelled creatures scuttled toward a nearby structure, their single eyes fixed on fresh prey as they prepared to strike. Seeing the new threat, he gathered his remaining energy, acknowledging that his physical form was nearing its breaking point, yet he refused to falter while others were still in danger. With a desperate roar, he unleashed a devastating volcano shot, his fist connecting with the hard carapace of the lead monster with explosive force. The creature's shell shattered into 1,000 shards under the pressure of the blow, the shock of the impact echoing through the narrow alleyway where Yua watched in terror. He stood tall before her, a fierce and jagged grin stretching across his face as he asserted his own strength, even as she looked upon his blackened, smoking form with a mixture of awe and horror, whispering that he was a monster himself. He stared ahead with unwavering resolve, his eyes burning with a fierce determination as he vowed that the town would not fall on his watch. As the smoke cleared, Keith approached, his gaze immediately falling on the blackened, charred flesh of the warrior's left arm. He urgently asked if there was any medicine left to treat such a severe burn, but the response was a grim negative. Despite the agony, the fighter insisted that as long as his right arm remained functional, he would continue. Realizing that Nick had gone to seek reinforcements, he understood that he was currently the only line of defense left in the town. Though he knew he couldn't take them all at once, he steeled himself for the impossible task, unleashing a colossal pillar of fire that consumed the surrounding area in a blinding flash of heat and light. Seeing the reckless display of power, the other man rushed forward to intervene, shouting a warning that such a strain would surely destroy his body. He was met with a sharp rebuff, told to stay out of matters that didn't concern him as the battle raged on. The argument intensified as he insisted on helping, advising the fire wielder to focus on controlling his volatile flames while he provided support. The offer was met with prideful disdain, as the warrior claimed he had no need for assistance from those he deemed weak, urging his companion to flee before the collateral damage claimed him as well. With a frustrated click of his tongue, he acknowledged the sheer stubbornness of the man before him. He realized that if his companion was willing to push himself to such extremes, he could no longer afford to hold back his own hidden strengths. A sudden, unsettling shift in the air caught the warrior off guard, his eyes widening in disbelief as he sensed a surge of unfamiliar energy. Nearby, Yua and Nick watched in silent horror, their faces pale as they witnessed a transformation they couldn't comprehend as Keith's form began to warp. He finally revealed the secret he had kept hidden, a monstrous, clawed limb that pulsed with dark power, a gift he had been reluctant to expose. When questioned if he was truly human or a monster in disguise, he simply stated that while he hated showing this form, he refused to abandon his ally, intending to use his enhanced speed to scout the remaining threats in the town. Keith shouts at Essen, his voice full of indignation. He declares that he will leave the town's defense to Essen for the moment, but warns that he will intervene the second Essen falters. Turning his attention to the children, he orders Nick and Yua to flee to the safety of the other adults. Nick hesitates, but the adventurer offers a final word of encouragement, telling the boy he has the potential to surpass them all. As they run, Nick cries out, begging him to survive and calling him the strongest. He then charges forward alongside Essen, acknowledging that their refusal to back down is a shared selfishness. As they close in on the leaf crab, Keith's arm begins to pulse with a dark, unsettling power, his skin darkening as he prepares to strike. High above the town, a figure blurs against the sky, leaping from one tiled roof to the next in a desperate race against time. The pursuit continues through the cramped, shadowed alleyways, the sound of boots hammering against the stone echoing off the walls. With a sudden, violent impact, Keith crashes through the air, the force of his movement kicking up clouds of debris as he maneuvers through the wreckage of the battlefield. Nearby, Essen stares into the massive, singular eye of the leaf crab, a grim realization settling over him. He knows that the current chaos is a direct consequence of his own choices. Before the monster can react, Keith lunges, his empowered fist striking the creature with bone-shattering force. As the dust settles, he turns to the trembling children, his voice strained as he checks to ensure they are unharmed. He grits his teeth, his dark form pulsing with a grim resolve as he realizes the battle is far from over. Despite the power he's unleashed, he knows he hasn't defeated every threat yet. Nearby, Yua is paralyzed with fear, her hands trembling as she watches the horror unfold. Suddenly, a piercing scream rips through the air as Essen is caught in the crushing grip of the monster's massive pincers, his body seemingly at the mercy of the beast's brutal counterattack. The young woman extends her hand, a soft glow emanating from her palm as she targets a small creature in the distance. With a gentle pulse of energy, the fox-like monster slumps over, succumbing to a deep, magical slumber. Seeing the creature fall so easily, her companion's eyes widen in genuine amazement. She stares at the sleeping beast, her expression a mix of shock and newfound respect for the utility of such a power. A small, knowing smirk plays on her lips as she acknowledges the potential of the skill. She lets out a soft chuckle, remarking that such a gift is truly something remarkable, even if it lacks direct offensive power. Despite the praise, she remains grounded, noting that while the help is significant, her own strength is still in its infancy. She explains that with this ability to neutralize threats, even novices like them can navigate the dangerous woods and defeat monsters with relative safety. However, as they grow more experienced, her perspective begins to shift toward a harsher reality. She bluntly proposes that they disband the party, arguing that now that they've reached D rank, the ability to merely put monsters to sleep is becoming a liability. She points out that it would be far more efficient to simply kill the enemies outright rather than wasting time and energy on a non-lethal approach that doesn't allow for proper combat growth. The weight of her words hangs heavy in the air as she turns her back on her partner. She admits that it irritates her to see someone reaping the rewards of their hunts without contributing to the actual violence of the kill, her silhouette growing smaller as she distances herself from their shared past. In the wake of the split, rumors of the girl's unique but limited gift spread through the guild. Other adventurers discuss her situation with a mix of dismissal and pragmatism, noting that while her power might be useful for beginners, it lacks the impact needed for high-rank hunts and leaves her without the necessary combat experience to survive on her own. It is during this period of isolation that a familiar, smug face approaches her with a proposition. He leans in, mentioning that he's heard of her interesting gift and suggests they team up for a plan he promises will be highly profitable, though his motives remain as shadowed as his reputation. He continues his pitch, telling Yua that the task is one only her unique gift can handle. Her eyes light up with hope and excitement, a stark contrast to her previous isolation. But the memory of that hope is suddenly shattered by a spray of crimson across a startled gaze. The violence is visceral as a heavy blow connects, sending a young man sprawling to the ground. Yua's scream pierces the air, her hands clutch to her head in terror as the chaos unfolds before her. He, the young adventurer Essen, takes the brunt of a vicious attack amidst a spray of blood, his body tensing as he endures the impact to shield the girl behind him. He wipes a smear of blood from his cheek, his expression remarkably calm despite the close call. Behind him, Yua is a mess of tears and apologies, her voice trembling as she begs for forgiveness for the danger she's caused. Looking down at the severed, twitching tail of the beast on the stone floor, he reassures her that the wound isn't as bad as it looks. He insists he's fine, even as the evidence of the struggle lies scattered around them. He turns his gaze toward her, his eyes softening as he truly sees the girl he just risked his life for. She looks back, her face etched with a mixture of guilt and profound relief. He confronts the trembling girl, asking if she belonged to the group responsible for releasing the monsters earlier that morning, while she can only offer a startled gasp in response. He watches as she begins to weep, her hands clutching her face as she confesses to using her unique gift to incapacitate the beasts, lamenting that her power was too weak to prevent the catastrophe. She listens as he gently tells her that she doesn't need to apologize for everything, though his tone quickly shifts to urgency as he asks if she can use her ability again to save his companions. He watches as she looks down in shame, admitting that she is unable to repeat the feat because the creatures develop a temporary resistance to her power once they awaken. She explains her motives, leading him to ponder the situation and realize that the two men who had been with her likely only recruited her to exploit the specific effects of her gift. He decides that while reaching Keith is important, he must first stabilize the immediate threat before they can find safety. The warrior is interrupted as the ground erupts, and a gargantuan leaf crab looms over them with its singular, menacing eye fixed upon its prey. The monster is joined by an even more terrifying presence, a leaf serpent. This massive, armored reptile towers over the battlefield, its scales shimmering like foliage as it prepares to strike. It loomed over them, a titan among monsters that made the earlier leaf crabs look like mere pests. Essen stared up in disbelief, realizing the town's destruction wasn't just from the crabs, but from this massive beast. Beside him, Yua was a mess of tears, sobbing that she only thought of how delicious it would be grilled and what a high price such a creature would fetch. He snapped at her, demanding to know how she ever planned to cook something that could feed hundreds of people, especially now that it was wide awake and furious. Yua could only bow her head in shame, repeatedly calling herself a careless idiot as the reality of their peril set in. The beast lunged with a deafening roar, its massive jaws snapping shut where they had stood only a second before. Essen scooped Yua into his arms, leaping back just as the ground shattered under the monster's weight. He gritted his teeth, realizing the situation was rapidly deteriorating as the leaf crab closed in from the other side. With Yua in his arms, he couldn't leap to the safety of the rooftops, leaving him no choice but to stand his ground. He shouted for her to run the moment he created an opening, promising to hold the monsters back. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes, protesting that his plan wouldn't work. Before he could ask why, she began to explain the hidden curse of her power. Her gift, known as hypnotist, was a double-edged sword that could lull enemies into a deep slumber, but at a terrible cost. While it neutralized threats, it also acted as a beacon, drawing the absolute hatred of any target affected by the spell directly toward her. They had managed a desperate escape from the market earlier, while the flame adventurer, Keith, stayed behind to keep the horde at bay. However, the monsters that broke free from his flames were now relentless in their pursuit. She realized with dawning horror that because they were now separated from Keith, the monster's focused malice would no longer be fixed on him. Instead, the creatures would prioritize her as their primary target, hunting her down with unwavering aggression. She clings to him, her voice trembling as she confirms the dire situation. If they can just take down the leaf serpent, the only remaining threat will be the horde Keith is currently distracting. He absorbs this information, his eyes narrowing with a grim determination. Realizing their only chance is to maintain distance, he urges her to keep running as the massive, leaf-scaled beast tears through the earth behind them. He suddenly releases her, causing her to stumble and cry out in a panic, begging him not to leave her behind. Her tears flow freely as the terror of being alone with a monster takes hold. However, he has no intention of deserting her. With a sharp command for her to stay low, he launches himself into the air. As she cowers on the ground, he becomes a blur of motion, leaping toward the looming threat to create the opening they so desperately need. He lunges forward, channeling the primal ferocity of the forest cat as he invokes its razor-sharp claws to strike. The strike lands with a thunderous impact, the sheer force of the spectral claws slamming into the massive serpent. It is a crushing blow, pinning the beast to the earth as the ground shatters beneath the weight of the assault. With a final, violent shredding motion, the creature's form is torn asunder, dissolving into nothingness. Watching the carnage subside, she can hardly believe they are still alive, the realization of their survival slowly dawning on her. The young man crouches, gasping for air as the adrenaline fades. He notes that while he didn't gain a new skill from the kill, the gamble paid off. He offers a blunt apology for using her as bait, explaining that his need to move quickly necessitated the risk. He continues, warning her that such a large-scale event will surely draw the attention of the Travel God Church. Before turning to flee, he makes a firm request for her to keep his unique abilities a secret, leaving her standing alone in the aftermath. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocks the distance, obliterating a nearby leaf crab in a single, overwhelming burst of power. He freezes, hearing a voice declare him the final target, and realizes the danger is far from over. The warriors stand at the center of a localized inferno, his body wreathed in intense, flickering heat. The air around him shimmers as the sheer power of his aura manifests as physical fire, consuming everything in his immediate vicinity. This overwhelming heat radiates outward, incinerating the monsters that had previously swarmed the area. A leaf crab is caught in the blast, its hard shell offering no protection against the searing flames as it lets out a final, shrill screech of agony. With a deafening roar, the energy reaches a crescendo, erupting in a massive pillar of fire that scours the earth and shatters the surrounding stone. The sheer force of the release creates a vacuum of heat that obliterates any remaining threats. His eyes, visible through the dancing embers, burn with a fierce, almost uncontrollable intensity. The focus within them is no longer that of a man, but of a force of nature unleashed. As the shockwave of the blast dissipates, the warrior remains standing firmly, his feet anchored to the scorched ground. Around him, the landscape has been transformed into a desolate wasteland where nothing remains of the monstrous horde but ash and smoldering ruins. From a nearby rooftop, the young adventurer watches the scene in stunned silence, his eyes wide with disbelief at the sheer scale of the destruction. He can barely comprehend the power he has just witnessed. He calls out to Keith, his voice filled with a mix of relief and growing dread. While he acknowledges that the surrounding monsters have been completely eradicated, he notes with alarm that the violent flames wreathed around the man's body show no signs of extinguishing. Keith, meanwhile, seems lost to the power, his head thrown back in a silent, agonizing roar. Suddenly, the flaming figure turns his aggression toward the only remaining target, lunging upward with terrifying speed. The young man barely has time to react, as the heat and force of the impact send him reeling backward over the edge of the stone wall. He splashes through the shallow water, his voice echoing with frantic concern as he calls out for his companion, desperate to know if the other man survived the inferno. Just as the shout leaves his lips, the fiery adventurer's strength finally fails, and he collapses forward into the murky water with a heavy splash. The fallen warrior winces, his eyes fluttering open just enough to weakly scold his savior for being too loud, his voice barely a rasp against the sudden silence of the battlefield. Lying flat on his back, his face is a mask of exhaustion and soot. Yet even in this state of total depletion, he clings to his pride, whispering a final, defiant claim of his own supremacy. Despite the arrogance, the younger man helps him to his feet, acknowledging the incredible feat of strength that just occurred while the older adventurer remains slumped and drained. As they sit for a moment to catch their breath, the youth asks for confirmation that the threat to the town has truly passed, and the veteran confirms it, noting the delay caused by the massive leaf-based monsters. He looks at the veteran with genuine awe, questioning how such massive beasts were slain without leaving a single scratch on the man, though the warrior remains silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. Supporting the weight of the prideful man, the youth begins the slow trek toward medical help, enduring a barrage of complaints about the pain of his burns and more boasts of being the strongest. He was utterly spent after the day's frantic events, which included a formal hearing at the local guild branch. The moment they reached the inn, exhaustion claimed him, and he collapsed into a deep, dreamless sleep. By the following morning, the young adventurer was back on his feet, navigating the town streets in search of the clinic. As he walked, his eyes fell upon a figure ahead, a woman draped in a pristine white cloak, her back turned to him as she moved with a certain grace. Sensing his presence, she spoke, addressing him with a formal title that caught him off guard. He stammered a confirmation, his brow furrowing in confusion at being called Mr. by a complete stranger. The woman spun around with a triumphant cheer, her face lighting up with a vibrant, almost predatory smile. She introduced herself as Percy, her attire marking her as someone of religious standing, though her energy was far from somber. Her expression shifted slightly as she leaned in, a sharp, calculating glint appearing in her eyes. Identifying herself as a priest from the Travel God Church, she requested a moment of his time to discuss the chaotic events that had unfolded the previous day. Percy introduces herself as a priest from the Travel God Church, catching Essen off guard with her sudden appearance. She asks if he has a moment to discuss the events of the previous day, her tone polite yet firm. He looks down, clearly hesitant about the sudden attention from such a powerful organization. He reluctantly agrees, realizing that avoiding the church's involvement might be impossible now that they have sought him out directly. Her expression brightens instantly as she thanks him, acknowledging the exhaustion he must be feeling after the recent turmoil. The priestess cheerfully leads the way, beckoning him to follow her toward their destination. As he trails behind, he can't help but feel a sense of dread, internally grumbling that dealing with the church's bureaucracy is more taxing than facing any monster. Their destination, the Travel God Church, is an organization dedicated to serving their deity, primarily tasked with managing adventurers who possess special gifts. Their influence is vast, acting as both a guiding hand and a regulatory body for those blessed with extraordinary abilities. Within its hallowed halls, the church bestows blessings upon those who reach the age of 12 or choose to convert, granting them the power of a gift. However, their role extends beyond benevolence. They also serve as judge and jury, punishing any followers who dare to violate their sacred doctrines. Furthermore, if an adventurer's actions lead to monster-related destruction within a town, they become the subject of a rigorous investigation by these very priests. The church ensures that those with power are held accountable for the consequences of their battles. Keith, Polari, and a large adventurer stand together, their backs to the world as they contemplate the gravity of the situation. The church's involvement has turned a simple incident into a matter of strict doctrine. As they walk through the town, Essen listens to Percy explain the core tenets of her faith. The Travel God Church views gifts as tools for the sole purpose of eradicating monsters, a philosophy they uphold with absolute rigidity. He watches her walk ahead, a cold realization settling in his chest. If the church ever learned the truth, that he can partially transform his own body into the very monsters they despise, he would almost certainly be hunted down and purged as a heretic. She leads him into a quiet room, gesturing for him to follow with a polite but firm invitation. He complies, his mind still racing with the implications of her earlier words. Once inside, he attempts to start his explanation of the recent battle, but she holds up a hand, asking him to wait. She reveals that she has already reviewed the investigation team's formal report, leaving him wondering what more she could possibly want from him. Suddenly, a massive tray of food is slammed onto the table with a heavy thud, the steam rising from sausages and fresh bread. The young adventurer stares at the feast in stunned silence, his previous anxiety momentarily replaced by sheer confusion at the sudden change in atmosphere. He watches as the priestess begins to eat with surprising gusto, her professional demeanor replaced by hunger. She admits that her eagerness to meet the hero who saved the town was so great that she rushed out without eating breakfast, though he remains defensive, clearly not ready to share his own meal. He sits before the lavish spread, his appetite momentarily dampened by the priestess's presence. When she asks if he intends to eat right there, he politely declines any further assistance, his focus remaining on the situation at hand. As the conversation continues, he insists that the credit for the recent events belongs to Keith, downplaying his own role. She smiles, noting his modesty, but explains that because the monster subjugation was irregular, she has already seen to it that both of their contribution scores receive a significant bonus. She acknowledges the official reports, but emphasizes the importance of hearing the account directly from a witness. He feels a bead of sweat form, wondering which part of the story she will choose to probe first. He begins his explanation by clarifying that he wasn't present when the monsters first went berserk, having only discovered the chaos upon his return from the dungeon. She listens intently, processing his words and noting the contradiction that while he was absent during the initial outbreak, he somehow managed to identify the culprit's face. He confirms that he caught a glimpse of one of them near the dungeon entrance, though their identity remains a mystery to him. When he inquires about the status of the investigation, she reveals that the girl possessing the hypnotist gift is currently being detained in a separate room nearby. The news strikes him with a sudden chill, prompting a desperate question about the girl's ultimate fate. Across the table, she remains unmoved, casually twirling a piece of meat on her fork with rhythmic detachment. She answers with chilling nonchalance, stating that for such a crime, the only outcome is the death penalty. The revelation leaves him paralyzed with shock, the weight of the church's absolute law suddenly feeling very heavy. He can barely process the weight of her words as she calmly explains the absolute authority of the church. With a casual sip of her tea, she notes that while the priests have the power to strip a person of their gift and even decree death, such a removal only occurs after the sentence is carried out. Because of this rigid stance, she argues that while hypnotizing monsters is a grave offense, the chaos and danger caused by losing control of them is far worse. Even though she acknowledges the girl's actions to lead the monsters away from the town, she remains firm that the girl bears the ultimate responsibility for the disaster. The priestess leans in, her gaze sharpening as she poses a chilling question. Would his own reputation truly improve if he were simply defeating monsters that he himself had brought into the world? The implication hangs heavy in the air, leaving him drenched in a cold sweat. In response, he remains silent, staring down at the ripples in his teacup. The weight of the conversation settles over the room like a physical shroud, the only sound being the faint clink of porcelain. Moments later, the tension of the private meeting gives way to a formal farewell. The priestess bows deeply, expressing her sincere gratitude on behalf of the Travel God Church for their assistance, while the veteran adventurer dismisses the praise, satisfied that their actions served a purpose. As the man prepares to take his leave, she suddenly remembers a final detail. He pauses, looking back as she calls out to them, her expression shifting from gratitude to a more inquisitive focus. She then asks if either of them encountered anything unusual during the chaos, specifically reports of a creature that resembled a human-shaped monster. The question is pointed, cutting through the casual air of their departure. Hearing this, he feels a jolt of internal panic, but quickly masks it with a strained smile. He flatly denies any knowledge of such a being, hoping his facade holds against her searching gaze. He maintains a polite facade as Percy acknowledges the confusion surrounding the incident, noting that even a patroller like him hadn't seen anything unusual. However, the atmosphere shifts when she casually mentions that any monsters masquerading as humans would face immediate execution, a statement that clearly rattles him. He feels beads of sweat roll down his forehead as the weight of her words sinks in. The threat of execution for his true nature hangs heavy in the air, forcing him to maintain his composure despite the mounting internal panic. Moments later, the tension finally breaks as Percy offers a cheerful apology for the delay and bids them farewell. He and Keith take their leave, the priestess's parting wish to meet again sounding more like a threat than a pleasantry to his ears. As they walk away, he can't help but reflect on the narrow escape, his face still etched with the lingering stress of the encounter. The thought of crossing paths with that woman again is something he desperately hopes to avoid. The pair eventually makes their way back through the quiet streets of the settlement toward a large, wooden building. The peaceful surroundings of the village stand in stark contrast to the life-or-death interrogation they just endured. Inside, Keith lies motionless on a bed, his entire body wrapped in thick, white bandages from head to toe. The severity of the injuries he sustained during the battle is now fully apparent, leaving him in a state of forced recovery. While he remains unconscious, Essen enters the room and is greeted by Yua and Nick, who have been waiting anxiously for their return. Yua expresses her immense relief at seeing him safe, her eyes wide with concern as she looks between him and the bandaged Keith. He listens as Nick explains that Keith is out of danger, thanks to a doctor blessed with a healing gift from the God of Compassion. While the internal injuries have been mended, the warrior still requires significant rest for his skin to fully regenerate and settle. He watches as his companion shouts with surprising vigor, his voice muffled by the thick layers of bandages covering his face. Though the words are a garbled mess of sounds, the spirit behind them remains unbroken, a fact that doesn't go unnoticed. Observing the scene, the warrior worries that the sight of their battered friend might be too much for the young ones. The injured man, however, is more concerned with his pride, desperately telling the children to look away and not witness him in this humiliating condition. Despite the man's protests, the young boy's eyes sparkle with pure admiration. To him, the hero in the bandages isn't pathetic. He was cool yesterday, is cool now, and will always be cool in his eyes. Inspired by her friend's enthusiasm, the young girl wonders aloud if she, too, could one day walk the path of an adventurer. The boy quickly agrees, his confidence in their shared future unwavering. Hearing their innocent praise, the wounded man can only huff in disbelief, calling them a strange group of children. Yet, beneath the bandages, his sharp eyes soften, perhaps touched by their unwavering faith. With a final wave, the children announce they must return to help at the shop, leaving the two men alone once more. The swordsman watches them depart, a gentle smile playing on his lips as he sees the spark of ambition they've left behind. He reflects on their potential, certain that they have what it takes to succeed. After all, they have spent their time looking at the back of a man who never gives up, a sight that serves as the ultimate inspiration for any aspiring hero. His expression softens into a warm smile as he shares this thought. From his bed of recovery, the bandaged man offers a quiet grunt of acknowledgement, finally accepting that perhaps his struggle was worth it if only to light a fire in the next generation. He stood by as the veteran adventurer, still heavily wrapped in bandages, offered a weary but genuine smile. The man called out to him, signaling that there was a specific favor he wished to ask, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that demanded attention. He was caught off guard by the sudden request, his eyes widening as he tried to imagine what the older man could want. A sense of nervous anticipation filled him as he waited for the details of the task, wondering what kind of mission a hero would entrust to him. The Roaring Reef, an E-rank dungeon, stands amidst the crashing waves of a turbulent sea. As a massive column of water erupts from the depths, Keith checks in on his companion's readiness. Essen scoffs at the question, his confidence unshaken despite the looming threat. He tells Keith to be the one who stays cautious, even as the higher-ranked adventurer boldly claims he will handle the brunt of the coming fight. Suddenly, a gargantuan creature with multiple eyes and a hard, segmented shell rises from the spray, casting a dark shadow over the young man. The warrior braces himself against the overwhelming presence of the beast, determined to break through the darkness it brings. Both men lock their gazes on the monstrosity, their faces etched with grim resolve as the ground beneath them trembles from the creature's sheer weight. This current struggle brings back the memory of a quiet moment in a recovery room, where a heavily bandaged Essen looked up at Keith and voiced a singular request. Keith had been surprised, questioning why the man he often mocked would ask anything of him. The swordsman had merely smiled then, brushing off his previous teasing to listen intently to what his companion truly needed. He listens intently as the injured man before him makes a startling request. Essen, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, reveals that his target is a leaf shrimp, a creature known as the strongest inhabitant of the Roaring Reef. He asks for help in defeating this monster, catching the seasoned adventurer off guard. Surprised by the sudden plea, he watches as Essen struggles to sit up, his movements stiff and pained. The room is quiet, save for the rustle of the bedsheets, as the wounded man tries to find the strength to continue his explanation. He finds that the effort of speaking takes a toll, his voice faltering as he begins to choke on his own words. He gasps for air, his body trembling under the weight of his injuries as he tries to force out a single, self-deprecating truth. With a sudden burst of intensity, he declares himself weak, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of frustration and resolve. The admission hangs heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the reckless bravery he had displayed only the day before. He goes on to explain the paradox of his existence. While his gift is undeniably the strongest, he lacks the capacity to control its overwhelming power. Furthermore, the waterlogged environment of the Roaring Reef is the worst possible match for his abilities, making any solo attempt at conquest a path towards certain mutual destruction. He is met with disbelief as the adventurer questions how someone who acted so recklessly could now speak of such limitations. Essen merely looks away, admitting that he had actually given up on challenging that particular dungeon years ago. A flicker of something deeper crosses his eyes as he begins to explain the true motivation behind his sudden change of heart. There's a weight to his gaze that suggests his reasons go far beyond simple monster hunting. Turning his gaze toward the window, he softly confesses that the sight of the reef reminded him of his hometown. It was this sudden surge of nostalgia and connection that drove him to act, despite the risks and his own perceived weaknesses. He listens as Keith, heavily bandaged in a hospital bed, clarifies that the recent monster attacks weren't caused by someone intentionally releasing them. He continues his explanation, describing the monster overflow, a disaster where creatures exceed a dungeon's capacity and break through the barriers, which once destroyed his own village. He describes a powerful image of the past, a lone adventurer standing amidst ruins, holding a tattered flag high as he declares that no one died. He credits this single warrior for the survival of the villagers, noting that the man chose to fight alone and suffered career-ending injuries rather than wait for reinforcements. He points to the memory of a young boy with spiky dark hair who stood with a determined smile, representing the lives saved by the hero's solitary strength. He gazes at his companion with a serious expression, defining true strength as the resolve to protect those in front of you at any cost. He listens as the young adventurer stands tall, eyes filled with a new sense of purpose, while declaring his need for the reward from defeating the leaf shrimp. He watches as the veteran's eyes widen in surprise, the older man repeating the name of the formidable creature in disbelief. He continues the explanation, noting that the guild offers a specific reward for the leaf shrimp's defeat, the water spirit's blessing. This news delights his companion, who realizes the blessing's ability to reduce burn damage is exactly what he needs for his future goals. Curious about the sudden partnership, the seasoned adventurer asks why he was the one chosen for this task, only to be met with a knowing, irritating grin. The younger man simply states that he sensed a shared conviction between them before the scene shifts to the turbulent waters where their target, a massive leaf shrimp, erupts from the depths. As the creature looms over them, surprisingly agile for its size, the veteran warns his partner not to hesitate, reminding the eternal last placer that the uneven footing puts them at a severe disadvantage. Great plumes of water erupt as the monster strikes, forcing the younger warrior to accept his role as the primary decoy to draw its attention. He nimbly avoids a crushing blow and counterattacks, though he privately acknowledges that his own strikes lack the explosive, instantaneous power of his partner's techniques. His plan is clear. He will use his superior speed to exhaust the beast, creating the perfect opening for the veteran to unleash his devastating finishing move once his energy has fully peaked. He nimbly evades the massive creature's charges, observing that despite its sudden bursts of speed, it can only move in predictable straight lines. Essen realizes that a beast of such immense proportions must be burning through its energy reserves at an incredible rate. Confident in his assessment, he decides the stage is set and that the final blow now rests entirely on Keith's shoulders. But before he can retreat, a blinding flash of energy erupts around him, catching him completely off guard. The force of the blast is immense, throwing his body back as he cries out in shock, his tactical confidence replaced by sudden, searing pain. Engulfed by the resulting cloud of steam and smoke, he vanishes from sight as the leaf shrimp's singular, cold eye stares through the haze. The sheer power of the strike leaves the air heavy with tension, casting a grim shadow over the young adventurer's fate. The battle reaches a fever pitch as Essen finds himself cornered by the massive crustacean. Keith shouts a desperate warning, identifying the monster's next move as its ultimate weapon, the devastating air cannon. The blast erupts with a thunderous roar, tearing through the environment and forcing the young warrior to scramble for safety. The creature's massive, singular eye remains fixed on its target, pulsing with malevolent intent. He manages to regain his footing as Yua calls out to check on his condition. While he apologizes for his momentary lapse in focus, Keith sternly warns him that even with allies at his side, underestimating such a powerful enemy is a fatal mistake. They pull back momentarily to assess the situation, the air thick with the scent of ozone and damp earth. He confesses that his flame charge has been completely exhausted, leading Keith to decide on an immediate regrouping to find new openings. He is pushed to his limits as Keith urgently asks if he can recharge his abilities while the leaf shrimp continues its relentless pursuit. The ground trembles under the weight of the monster's heavy, leaf-like shell. The realization dawns on him that the beast's behavior has shifted. It is no longer attacking indiscriminately, but has focused its entire predatory instinct solely on him. He freezes for a heartbeat, sensing something unusual in the monster's movements as it prepares for its next strike. He and his companion scramble as the massive crustacean unleashes a dual-pronged assault. The creature's twin cannons roar, sending concussive blasts of air that tear into the earth. Keith realizes with a grimace that the beast can track both of them at once, leaving no room for error. Because of this relentless fire, the seasoned adventurer finds himself pushed to the limit, his boots skidding across the dirt as he narrowly avoids another impact. He curses under his breath, the sheer volume of the monster's offensive making it nearly impossible to find an opening. Moments later, he shouts across the chaotic battlefield, warning that they won't be able to coordinate their movements if they stay pinned down like this. The constant explosions of air are driving a wedge between them, forcing them further apart. In response, the younger warrior decides to change the flow of the fight. He ignites his power, unleashing a violent burst of heat and light that consumes the immediate area. The resulting explosion is massive, sending a thick plume of smoke and debris into the air to mask their movements. As the chaos unfolds, the monster's single, massive eye narrows, searching through the haze for its prey. Keith clicks his tongue in annoyance, watching the silhouette of his companion remain defiant within the swirling embers, the heat of the distraction still radiating through the clearing. The smoke begins to thin, revealing the two men standing amidst the scorched earth. Keith observes that the creature's barrage has finally ceased, realizing that the sudden flare-up was a calculated distraction designed to break the monster's rhythm and buy them a moment of respite. With the immediate danger past, the two take a moment to catch their breath and assess their dwindling supplies. Keith voices his concerns about their disadvantage, noting that they will eventually run out of medicine if the battle drags on and they are forced to retreat. His curiosity then turns toward the nature of his companion's strange abilities, questioning if consuming monsters might eventually turn the boy into one himself. The dark-haired youth quickly dismisses the fear, explaining that he only inherits the skills of what he eats, not their form. Though Keith remains slightly unsettled by the concept, he offers a confident smirk, promising to look after his comrade should the worst happen. Keith finds the sentiment oddly comforting, even if the thought of his friend's monstrous potential still lingers in the back of his mind. Keith suggests a plan to turn the tide. Essen points out the extreme difficulty of approaching the beast to consume it and gain its abilities, but the veteran adventurer, despite his arrogance, offers to act as bait to draw the creature in. He fumes, blaming his companion for the failure of their previous strategy. The thought of consuming the monster's spindly antennae revolts him, fearing they might lodge in his throat, yet he begrudgingly accepts the task to ensure their survival. As they move into position, the young man argues that expanding their arsenal is their best chance. His rival remains cynical, pointing out that a new skill is no certain path to victory in such a dire situation. With a shared look of grim determination, they prepare to strike. The veteran adventurer lets out a sharp command to begin the assault, signaling the start of their desperate gambit. Across the murky waters, the massive crustacean remains stationary, its leaf-like armor blending into the environment as it waits for its next meal to wander into range. Suddenly, the surface erupts in a violent spray of water and debris. The beast lunges forward, its massive form churning the wetland into a chaotic froth as it targets the intruders. The veteran takes his place as the decoy, standing firm on a jagged rock. He narrowly avoids a crushing blow, clicking his tongue in annoyance as the monster's strike misses its mark, forcing him to reposition quickly. A massive concussive force tears through the air, slamming into the creature. The impact sends plumes of water and smoke skyward, momentarily obscuring the battlefield in the wake of the powerful strike. It seems to be losing its potency as the distance increases, a weakness Essen notes as he watches the creature's eye dart around in the chaos. Essen observes the clash of energies, initially thinking the forces are merely canceling each other out as the air swirls violently around them. He soon realizes that the energies aren't just clashing, they're synergizing into something far more potent. While Keith continues his relentless assault, Essen prepares himself, his mind racing to capitalize on the monster's unique biology. Having successfully integrated the monster's essence, he feels the surge of a new ability, the Leaf Shrimp's air cannon, and he wastes no time in putting it to the test. The seasoned warrior feels a recoil so intense it nearly knocks him back, leading him to question if the strike was sufficient, though Essen remains confident. Essen explains the mechanics of their newfound strategy, detailing how the super-compressed air from the creature's pincer muscles can be combined with flames for a devastating effect. Together, they unleash their synchronized power, creating a blinding explosion that tears through the battlefield. He hesitates, his face slick with sweat as he questions if this desperate gambit will truly be enough to bring the beast down. Beside him, Keith snaps that there is no time for explanations, barking a command for him to unleash the air cannon at its absolute maximum output. The young man steels his resolve, nodding firmly as he chooses to place his full trust in his companion's plan. He braces himself, his eyes narrowing with focus as he prepares to channel every ounce of his newly acquired power. Standing firm against the churning waters, the two adventurers position themselves for the final strike while the massive crustacean looms ahead. The air crackles with the gathering energy of their impending assault. With a synchronized roar that echoes across the battlefield, Keith invokes the searing heat of his prominence, while Essen releases the pressurized gale of his blast. Their combined voices scream, "Blast!" as the two distinct forces erupt from their hands. The swirling vortexes of flame and wind collide, intertwining into a singular, devastating spiral of destruction. This colossal sphere of energy slams into the leaf shrimp with the force of a falling star, engulfing the monster's jagged shell in a blinding dome of light and pressure. A deafening roar of displaced air and shattering chitin fills the world. Under the relentless weight of the explosion, the creature's massive form begins to buckle and disintegrate, unable to withstand the sheer magnitude of the combined elemental fury. As the creature's massive form begins to crumble, he watches with wide, breathless eyes, the sheer scale of their combined power finally sinking in. Beside him, the veteran adventurer grits his teeth, his gaze fixed on the dissipating smoke as he acknowledges that by overcoming such a formidable foe, they have both taken a significant step toward true strength. The two of them stand amidst the settling dust, dwarfed by the hollowed-out husk of the monster they just felled, the silence of the battlefield returning as the threat finally vanishes. The sky is vast and clear, with towering white clouds drifting peacefully over the landscape. Beneath that serene sky, the two warriors stand before the massive, smoking carcass of a leaf shrimp, the silence of the wetlands returning after the heat of battle. They break into cheers, Keith's face splitting into a wide grin as Essen pumps his fist, the weight of their victory finally sinking in. Keith expresses his gratitude for the others' quick thinking, though he can't help but boast about his own prowess as the strongest. In exchange for the monster's legs, they discuss securing the water spirit's blessing, a prospect that fills Essen with a renewed sense of ambition as he consumes a portion of the fallen beast to absorb its essence, eager to reach even greater heights. As they prepare to depart, Keith inquires about his future path. He admits that he needs to return home to replenish his funds, while Keith reveals his intention to remain in the area a while longer to train some disciples. They share a final, knowing look, the bond forged in the heat of combat evident in their eyes as they acknowledge the mutual support that led to their success. The high-ranking adventurer offers a heartfelt word of thanks, and he meets the gaze with a genuine smile, wishing his temporary ally well as their paths diverge. He seals their new alliance with a firm fist bump, a silent acknowledgement of the strength they both displayed in the recent hunt. Following this gesture of respect, the two warriors turn and walk their separate paths through the quiet town, their business concluded for now. Across the city, the focus shifts to the grand entrance of the Advanced Adventurers Guild, where the most elite members of the profession congregate. As she makes her way toward the gate, a boisterous voice calls out to her, cutting through the ambient noise of the street. The man approaching is a high-ranking adventurer who greets her with a confident, almost flirtatious air, suggesting she might have been looking for him. She is quick to shut him down, ordering him to stop trailing her and reiterating her refusal to join his ranks. She remains cold, telling him flatly that he would be nothing more than a hindrance to her progress. He takes the insult with a smile, seemingly used to her sharp tongue. He continues to press his case, arguing that their respective abilities would complement each other perfectly, even if his own unique gift isn't tailored for direct combat. She dismisses the idea, noting that his personality is ill-suited for her needs. Finally, she halts the conversation, her gaze sharpening as she informs him that her visit today has a much more specific purpose than their usual banter. She stands firm as the man continues his interrogation, his voice dripping with feigned curiosity. He recalls seeing her at the ranking board before she suddenly bolted toward the lower district, a place he clearly deems beneath her. In response to his smug observation, she sharply tells him to stop his nonsense and move aside. He merely chuckles, questioning if she followed him, and remarks that it isn't right for someone of her noble standing to frequent such a filthy area. The air between them chills when he mentions the name Essen, causing her eyes to widen in a flash of visible distress. He leans in, noting with a predatory grin that he has never seen her wear such an expression before, confirming that the name holds significant weight. He grows bolder, reaching out to tilt her chin up as he assures her that he has no immediate plans to harm the boy. However, he reminds her that as nobles, they are expected to maintain a certain level of dignity that separates them from the commoners. Stepping back slightly, but maintaining his overbearing presence, he argues that being overly friendly with trash-like lower-rank adventurers tarnishes the reputation of all who have reached their elite status. His fingers linger on her face as he delivers a veiled threat, suggesting that the boy's future safety depends entirely on her own choices and cooperation. With a final, mocking laugh, he dismisses the vulgar talk and turns to leave, telling her to think carefully about his words. She stands frozen, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and cold fury as he disappears into the guild's corridors. Left alone in the silence, she stares at the ground, her eyes burning with an intense, dark resolve. His parting promise of a welcome feels less like an invitation and more like a tightening noose. She was left behind in her fury, but life at the lower-rank Adventurers Guild continued its bustling pace, oblivious to the tension between the high-ranking elites. He walked through the streets, reflecting on his recent progress. His rank had climbed to 65,000, a significant jump from his previous standing around 85,000. While the expedition had certainly provided a boost, the memory of the chaotic monster overflow that made it possible left him with a bittersweet feeling. As he stepped through the familiar doors of the guild, a cheerful voice cut through the ambient noise. Iruru, the receptionist, spotted him immediately, her face lighting up with a bright, welcoming smile as she called out his name. She quickly moved to greet him, mentioning how long it had been since his last visit. In her hands, she held a copy of the Travel God Church's latest report, which she had been studying intently before his arrival. Pointing to a specific section, she excitedly revealed that his victory over a massive monster had been documented for all to see. He tried to downplay the achievement, claiming he hadn't done much and that the situation was simply manageable, but she wouldn't hear of it, insisting that his contribution was far greater than he admitted. She explained that keeping a close eye on such reports was part of her duty, particularly when he seemed to have a knack for finding himself in the middle of trouble. He couldn't help but notice the sheer level of detail she had absorbed from the text. He offered a warm, grateful laugh, genuinely touched by the attention she paid to his career. However, his sincere thanks seemed to catch her off guard, causing a sudden, deep crimson to creep across her cheeks. She became visibly flustered, her hands waving frantically as she stammered through an explanation. In a desperate attempt to hide her growing embarrassment, she insisted that her interest was purely professional and that she certainly wasn't making a special effort to follow his every move. She listens as he reflects on his low rank, acknowledging that despite the thousands of adventurers the guild supports, she has been looking out for him specifically. He offers a warm, genuine smile, praising her as a first-class receptionist, which only seems to deepen her flustered state. In response to his praise, she quickly retreats behind her professional duties, insisting that as a lower-level guild staff member, she doesn't have the luxury of playing favorites or cheering for specific individuals. Her face contorts with a mix of embarrassment and frustration as she vehemently denies being angry, even as her hands tremble and her expression betrays her true feelings. He can't help but ask if he's somehow upset her, sensing the sudden shift in her mood. A brief, awkward silence falls between them as she focuses intently on her paperwork, avoiding his gaze. She eventually breaks the tension by expressing her genuine relief that he is safe, a sentiment that catches him off guard. He responds with a bright, reassuring smile, reaffirming his gratitude for her concern. She quickly regains her composure, encouraging him with a bright smile to keep up the good work and stay focused on his goals. However, beneath the surface of their pleasant exchange, dark rumors have begun to circulate through the lower districts of the city, whispered by shadowed figures about strange tools and unsettling incidents. As he prepares to depart, he warns her to be careful, noting that the public safety in this particular area has been declining lately. She thanks him for his concern, her smile lingering as he walks away. Suddenly changing the subject to more pressing matters, she presents him with a new document with a cheerful flourish, a summary of recommended dungeons for his current level. He leans in, his interest piqued by the new opportunities she's laid out for him. He accepts the handwritten list from the receptionist, his face lighting up with genuine gratitude as she explains she curated these specifically for his current skill level. Looking down at the paper, he listens as she highlights Phoenix Fern Valley, a treacherous landscape defined by jagged cliffs and winding rivers that have carved deep into the earth. The valley itself is a daunting sight, a labyrinth of stone and greenery widely regarded as the most grueling challenge available to those of the year-end. Standing amidst the towering spires, he watches a hawk soar effortlessly through the air, noting that while the verticality would stop most, his unique gift makes this the perfect hunting ground. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunges from a rocky outcrop, his blade flashing as he intercepts the predatory bird mid-flight. The creature lets out a piercing cry of pain as his strike connects, feathers scattering into the wind. He follows through with a decisive blow, and as the life fades from the beast, a strange sensation washes over him, signaling the acquisition of the Valley Hawk's keen vision. Standing over the fallen creature, he offers a quiet word of thanks for the strength it provided, though he finds himself puzzled by the specific terminology of the new power he just absorbed. He decides to test his newly acquired ability, focusing his gaze as the world around him begins to shift. His pupils narrow and reshape, mimicking the predatory focus of the hawk he just consumed. The transformation is instantaneous and startling. His field of vision widens significantly, allowing him to track the minute movements of a small rodent in the brush with impossible clarity. This incredible dynamic visual acuity reveals a world of detail he had never noticed before, but his awe is quickly interrupted by a strange sight in the distance. High above the valley floor, a massive valley hawk soars through the air, but it is not hunting alone. Clutched in its powerful talons is a young woman who, far from being terrified, seems disturbingly enthusiastic about her predicament. As she wails about being deliciously eaten, the young adventurer watches in utter disbelief, his mind racing to process whether this is a genuine cry for help or something far more bizarre. High in the sky, a massive valley hawk clutches a young girl in its talons, her terrified screams echoing across the valley as she is carried further from the ground. Below, Essen watches the predator's ascent, his vision blurring with a strange, overwhelming sensation. He quickly deactivates his enhanced sight, realizing his body hasn't yet adapted to the strain of these new eyes. But he knows he cannot hesitate. He has to help her. He stands on a rocky precipice, tracking the bird's flight path as it shrinks into a mere speck against the distant mountains, marveling at the incredible distance it has covered in such a short time. While the girl's fear turns into a bizarre sense of wonder at the view from above, the young adventurer sprints along the jagged cliffside. He reasons that since the hawk hasn't killed her yet, it must be bringing her back to its nest, giving him a narrow window to intervene. As the girl continues her frantic chatter, Essen's sharp eyes scan the terrain below, confirming the presence of a wide river that could cushion a fall. With a grim look of determination, he prepares his next move, certain that he can reach her before it's too late. With a sudden burst of energy, he leaps into the open air, calling upon a specialized wing skill that allows him to glide through the sky like a bird of prey himself. The hawk lets out a startled cry as it realizes it is no longer alone in the air. His focus narrows, his pupils dilating as he locks onto his target with supernatural precision, the world around him slowing down as he prepares the killing blow. He strikes with lethal speed, his blade clashing against the hawk's powerful, sharp talons. The creature shrieks in pain as the impact forces it to loosen its grip, sending the girl tumbling toward the depths below. He plunges through the air, his eyes locked on the girl as they both plummet toward the earth. The wind howls around them, a chaotic roar that drowns out her terrified screams as they fall further away from the predatory bird. With a surge of focus, his vision sharpens, narrowing down to the single goal of reaching her hand. A silent vow of success echoes in his mind as he prepares for the final reach, refusing to let her fall. Because of this intense concentration, he manages to bridge the gap, his fingers brushing against hers before locking in a firm, desperate grip. Above them, the hawk's feathers drift away like falling snow, a remnant of the struggle that nearly cost them their lives. Moments later, massive wings sprout from his back, catching the air and slowing their descent until they touch down gently on the grassy plains. He holds her securely in his arms, the sudden transformation leaving them both breathless as the immediate danger passes and they reach the safety of the ground. As they stand on solid ground, he immediately offers an apology, his voice strained from the effort of the uncontrolled descent and the shock of his own power. She quickly dismisses his concerns, reminding him that he had just risked everything to save her from certain death, regardless of how they land. In response, she grabs his hands with an intensity that catches him off guard, her eyes wide with a mix of adrenaline and awe. He, however, remains focused on her well-being, asking if she sustained any injuries during the ordeal while she seems more concerned with the miracle she just witnessed. Instead of answering, she begins a frantic interrogation, her words tumbling out in a rush as she questions the nature of his monstrous form and whether he is even human. He can only stand there, overwhelmed by her sudden burst of energy and the barrage of questions about the monster-like parts he had displayed. Eventually, she catches her breath and offers a proper introduction, revealing her name to be Ryuka. He reciprocates, finally finding a moment of calm to state his own name, Essen, as the tension of the rescue begins to fade into a new, curious acquaintance. She hums thoughtfully, her finger to her chin as she processes the recent events. Essen, however, is visibly tense, his brow furrowed as he questions her lack of fear. He points out that most people would be suspicious of someone who looks like a monster, even if that person had just saved their life. He seems genuinely perplexed by her calm demeanor. In response, she begins to rationalize the situation, explaining that his transformation must be an adventurer's unique gift rather than a true monstrous nature. She notes that the magical barriers surrounding dungeons are specifically designed to prevent monsters from escaping into the outside world, making his presence as a monster highly unlikely. She pauses for a moment, acknowledging the slim possibility of a newly appeared monster, but quickly dismisses the concern. Essen watches her, still waiting for a more definitive reaction to the strange power he displays. Suddenly, her expression shifts into one of pure, unbridled obsession as she declares her absolute love for monsters. With a manic glint in her eyes and a wide, toothy grin, she seems completely overtaken by her fascination, her previous calm replaced by a feverish excitement. The young adventurer is taken aback by this sudden outburst, his eyes widening in shock. She continues her enthusiastic rant, insisting that even if he were a monster, she wouldn't care in the slightest. In fact, she admits a preference for getting closer to human-shaped creatures of that nature. As she continues to ramble about the specialized organs and irresistible designs of monsters, he can only stand there, feeling increasingly overwhelmed by her intensity. She recounts how she had even tried to get close to a monster earlier just to see it up close, seemingly oblivious to the danger she had been in. She then turns her full attention back to him, eagerly pleading to see the wings and fangs once more. He hesitates, explaining that his gift isn't something he's comfortable showing off to others, but she playfully teases him for being shy, refusing to take no for an answer. Finally relenting to her persistent requests, he focuses his energy and calls forth the power once again. With a sharp exclamation, The silver wings of the valley falcon erupt from his back, shimmering with a metallic light as they manifest in the open air. He stands still as she gazes in awe at the massive, feathered wings sprouting from his back. She can't help but marvel at how authentic they look. Before he can react, she throws herself onto the plumage, hugging the soft feathers with reckless abandon. He asks if this display is sufficient, clearly uncomfortable with her sudden physical proximity and intense curiosity. She continues her tactile investigation, noting that they lack the typical musk of an animal and are surprisingly soft and fluffy. Her enthusiasm only grows as she compares them to other creatures, while he desperately pleads for her to stop, his face flushing with embarrassment as he tries to maintain some semblance of personal space. She is caught off guard when he finally forces the wings to dissipate, overwhelmed by her eccentric behavior and the bizarre suggestion that she might try to taste them. He remains paralyzed by nerves as she continues to hover in his personal space, her physical presence looming over him even without the wings. He laments his own perceived weakness while she finally relents, sensing his genuine distress and ending her intense inspection. He notices the state of her attire as they begin to walk, prompting him to ask if she is a high-ranking adventurer. She laughs off the suggestion, clarifying that she is merely a humble craftsman, though her insights suggest a much deeper expertise than she lets on. She leads him toward a peculiar, sturdy-looking workshop, cheerfully offering to craft him new equipment to replace his torn clothes. She leads the way with a flourish, presenting her workshop as a token of gratitude for his help and for sharing the secret of his unique ability. The structure looms ahead, a bizarre architectural feat perched atop massive, jointed limbs that resemble the legs of a great beast. He stares up in genuine awe, admitting he had no idea such a facility existed so far beyond the city walls. The sheer scale of the workshop against the open landscape is breathtaking, a testament to the ingenuity of its creator. As they draw nearer, the young man can't help but compare the building's many legs to those of a giant spider. His companion beams, confirming his observation with a laugh, while he reflects on the fact that this is his very first visit to a professional craftsman's domain. She quickly corrects any misconception, explaining that this is no ordinary forge. This magic workshop is a direct manifestation of her own specialized gift, a creation born of her unique power rather than mere stone and mortar. With a playful wink, she notes that while most craftsmen possess standard gifts like blacksmithing or cooking, her own ability is far more unconventional. She draws a direct parallel to the unusual nature of his own powers, suggesting they share a common bond in their rarity. He offers a warm smile, acknowledging that special is a fitting description for such a place. His words clearly resonate with her, as she responds with an enthusiastic, high-pitched agreement, delighted that he appreciates the uniqueness of her home. Stepping through the threshold, he is immediately struck by the warmth of a roaring forge and the organized chaos of a working laboratory. The air is thick with the scent of metal and magic, and he can't help but let out a soft gasp of surprise at the interior's complexity. She beckons him deeper into the cluttered interior, where piles of materials and half-finished projects line the walls. It is a space of pure creation, and he can only look on in wonder as he begins to explore the heart of her craft. She encourages him to explore the workshop while she gets ready, noting that he finally looks the part of a craftsman's client. He agrees, eager to see what's inside. Moving deeper into the room, he examines the various components scattered about, realizing that these are high-quality, mid-rank materials. His eyes land on a peculiar, skeletal jawbone resting on a table. As he reaches out to touch the artifact, it suddenly snaps shut with a violent crack, catching his hand in its jagged teeth. She watches from the side, chiding him for his lack of caution around such volatile items. The young man cries out in pain, fearing for his digits, while she simply bursts into laughter at his misfortune. The trap remains firmly clamped onto his finger, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking even in a workshop. He grumbles about the blatant trap, but she dismisses his complaints, explaining that undead materials often retain a mind of their own. Suddenly, her eyes light up as the incident inspires a new design for his gear. She quickly flips open her ledger, ready to record the sudden burst of inspiration. Turning back to him with a mischievous glint in her eye, she announces that it's time for measurements, bluntly ordering him to strip so she can get the exact dimensions needed for the new equipment. He can only stare back in stunned silence. He recoils in a panic, his face flushing as he tries to shield himself from Ryuka's clinical advances. He stammers about needing mental preparation, but she is relentless, dismissing his modesty with the casual remark that she has seen plenty of naked men in her line of work. As she urges him to hurry before nightfall, the sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoing from the hallway brings their chaotic exchange to a sudden, chilling halt. The silhouette of a visitor looms in the doorway, casting a long shadow across the workshop floor. It is Polari, arriving with the intent of seeking maintenance for her blade, only to be met with the sight of the blacksmith grappling with a half-clothed man. The air in the room thickens with an agonizing silence as her eyes lock onto the scene, while he can only stare back in wide-eyed, speechless terror. She stands frozen, a deep crimson blush creeping up her neck as the reality of the situation sinks in. Ryuka, oblivious to the tension, offers a cheerful greeting, seemingly unaware of how scandalous the scene appears to an outsider. Beside her, the young adventurer remains paralyzed, his heart hammering against his ribs as he realizes there is no easy way to explain his current state. Her shock quickly curdles into a volatile mix of confusion and outrage, erupting in a sharp demand for an explanation. The workshop, once a place of quiet craft, is now the stage for a frantic confrontation as she bellows, wanting to know exactly why he is there and in such a state of undress. Essen sits shirtless in the dim light of the workshop, catching his breath amidst the stacked firewood. His rest is abruptly cut short as a familiar, imposing figure appears in the doorway, her shadow stretching across the stone floor. She steps further into the room, her sharp gaze immediately locking onto him. He flinches, sweat beading on his brow as he realizes just how compromising his current state appears to his childhood friend. He attempts to break the heavy silence with a nervous greeting, noting how long it has been since their last meeting. She acknowledges him with a curt, icy response, her eyes narrowing as he expresses his genuine shock at finding her in such an unexpected location. The tension in the room thickens when a voice from the background asks if they are interrupting something. He feels a sudden, literal chill run down his spine as the atmosphere turns predatory, the weight of the woman's silent judgment pressing down on him. She drops all pretense of civility, her face darkening with a terrifying intensity as she warns him against playing dumb. Looking him up and down, she remarks on his disheveled, shirtless state, concluding that he must be enjoying himself. He frantically tries to explain that his lack of clothing was at the other woman's insistence, though the words only seem to make the situation worse. He desperately adds that he only met Ryuka earlier that very day, hoping this fact will somehow mitigate the suspicion. She remains silent, her expression unreadable but her focus unwavering as she processes his frantic defense. A sharp, mocking smile finally touches her lips as she repeats his own words back to him, highlighting the absurdity of being found half-naked in the home of a total stranger. He realizes too late how poorly he phrased his explanation, stammering in a futile attempt to correct the misunderstanding while she notes how relaxed he seems to be in his new environment. She stands firm, her gaze coolly assessing the flustered man before her. He stammers out a desperate defense, insisting that his state of undress was merely a necessity for taking measurements and that there is nothing untoward happening. She remains unimpressed, flatly stating that she has no interest or time for such frivolous dalliances with women. Her cold demeanor suddenly cracks into a sly, knowing smirk as she admits she was merely playing with him. Seeing his face after such a long absence prompted a sudden urge to tease. He can only stare in stunned silence, the color draining from his face as the weight of her joke sinks in. She continues, explaining that her familiarity with the craftswoman runs deep, far predating his own acquaintance. While she speaks with a calm authority, he struggles to regain his composure, mentally noting that her sense of humor is as chilling as it is unexpected. She's questioned by the young man, who asks if the woman in the goggles is indeed the one responsible for her high-grade equipment. She confirms this with a simple nod, her focus shifting as the sound of approaching footsteps echoes through the workshop. She watches as the craftswoman herself bursts back into the room, triumphantly holding a polished blade. The artisan apologizes for the wait, her energy a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere from moments before. Among the elite circles of advanced adventurers, her reputation as a master of her trade is undisputed. She presents the weapon to its owner, noting that while the repairs were minor, she took the liberty of fine-tuning the magic conduction channels to make them more efficient. The warrior accepts the blade with a quiet word of thanks, her respect for the artisan's skill evident in her eyes. She receives a warm smile from the artisan, who remarks on how well the warrior maintains her gear, a sign of a true professional. As the blade is unsheathed, it catches the light, shimmering with a renewed, ethereal glow that speaks to the quality of the recent enchantments. She is praised by the young man, who marvels at the fact that she is the preferred smith for the world's 9th-ranked adventurer. The craftswoman merely laughs it off with a modest shrug, insisting that she simply strives to produce work worthy of such high-level clients. She apologizes for the delay, but Essen reassures her, recognizing the genuine kindness behind her work. She then offers to handle his equipment as well, handing over a document that leaves him momentarily flustered. The smith asks if the two of them are already acquainted, and they both admit to sharing the same hometown. This revelation surprises her, as she finds it unusual for two people from the same origin to operate as solo adventurers rather than as a team. He clarifies that they did start out together, but the gap in their natural talents became impossible to ignore as they progressed. With a hint of regret, He explains that he was the one who chose to break up the party, a decision that seems to draw a sharp, silent reaction from his former partner. The young man admits that he felt like a burden, unable to keep pace with Polari's meteoric rise in power. Her ascent was truly unprecedented. In a world where many struggle to reach the top 10,000, she surged to the 9th rank in a single year. She listens intently as Essen explains that his refusal to be carried by others is a matter of personal pride, arguing that a rank which doesn't reflect one's true ability is ultimately meaningless. Her expression softens into a contemplative smile as she considers the weight of his conviction. She candidly admits to the group that this specific trait is what she finds most appealing about him, a directness that sends Ryuka into a flustered panic while she remains perfectly composed. She then shifts the conversation, questioning why a craftsman of Ryuka's obvious talent is dedicating herself to making equipment for someone like Essen. She listens as the memory of their first meeting prompts Ryuka to reminisce about the similar circumstances they faced back then. She watches as the peaceful atmosphere is suddenly broken by Ryuka's clumsy mishap, though Essen merely smiles and reaffirms his commitment to getting stronger. Their interaction brings a faint blush to her face as she turns away, confessing her anticipation for his growth, while realizing she must also continue to push herself. She is met with his unwavering gaze and a confident grin as he vows to definitely catch up to her level one day. He stood by as Ryuka and Polari shared a quiet moment of mutual understanding, their bond strengthened by the events they had just survived. As they stepped out into the open air, Ryuka called out her thanks, wishing them a safe trip back. They waved a final goodbye, leaving the warmth of the building behind as they set off on the road once more. Their departure was cut short by the sudden, unwelcome appearance of Keith, who mocked them for venturing so far into such a remote area. Polari's patience snapped instantly, and she demanded to know why he was stalking them again, though a flicker of suspicion crossed her mind regarding the suspicious timing of his arrival. Polari recognizes the man known as Keith, or Wellness, as he makes his arrogant entrance. Nearby, Essen and Ryuka look on, surprised by the sudden arrival of the high-ranking adventurer. He immediately raises a hand to his nose, complaining about an unpleasant smell permeating the workshop. The young woman watches him with a look of growing annoyance, her patience already tested. The high-ranking adventurer continues to shield his face, staring down at Essen with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. The tension between the two is palpable as they stand face to face. He asks what the problem is, clearly baffled by the man's blatant hostility and unable to understand why he is being targeted so aggressively. He is met with a sharp scoff as the man questions why such a shabby man is even permitted to be inside the workshop in the first place. He then turns his attention to the Ice Princess, suggesting that being in the same space as someone he considers a rat will only serve to tarnish her beauty. She sharply tells him to stop his insults, while the youth remains confused by the unprovoked attack. He doesn't stop there, turning to the shopkeeper to tell her she should be more selective with her customers before asking his companion if she doesn't think this company lowers her status. He is met with a sharp retort from Ryuka, who asserts that she has every right to choose who enters her home and is indeed being very selective about her guests, making it clear he wasn't invited. She watches as he turns to depart, ignoring Essen's call to wait. The arrogant adventurer dismisses the plea, stating he only came to collect Polari and has no intention of staying a moment longer. He is interrupted by Essen, who demands to know who he thinks he is, pointing out the incredible rudeness he has displayed since the moment he arrived at the workshop. The youth is met with a sneer as the adventurer lectures him on his lack of proper etiquette, claiming that a lowly, lower-ranked individual has no right to address an upper rank in such a manner. He then strikes a pose, formally introducing himself as Wellness, the 73rd ranked adventurer and a noble genius blessed by the travel god, while mocking Essen's ignorance as the typical trait of a rat from another world. With a triumphant and manic grin, he bellows his most outrageous claim yet, that he is Polari's lover, leaving the entire room in a state of stunned silence. He watches the shock on their faces as Essen turns to Polari, desperately asking if there is any truth to the man's boastful words while she remains visibly flustered. She looks away and quietly confirms the relationship, prompting Ryuka to shrug it off as a simple matter of adult affairs that they shouldn't be surprised by. She remains silent as the noble delivers his final insult, warning the defeated man never to show his face again. The weight of the situation hangs heavy in the air, reflected in the sharp, focused intensity of her gaze. As the noble turns to leave, beckoning her to follow, the young man they leave behind stands frozen, his face a mask of utter disbelief and heartbreak. His mocking laughter echoes across the open field as they walk away. From a distance, the mysterious woman in white watches the scene unfold, her expression unreadable as he continues to gloat about the pathetic look on his rival's face. The mysterious woman eventually speaks up, calling out his arrogance and admitting that she felt pathetic being forced to participate in such a blatant lie. She reminds him that while he could easily eliminate someone like that, doing so would bring unwanted consequences from the guild, and he shouldn't be so quick to dismiss the strength of the one he just humiliated. Her conviction remains unshaken as she declares that the young man will rise again through his own strength, driven by a promise he once made. She is certain that his spirit is resilient enough to overcome the malice directed at him. The arrogant adventurer merely scoffs at her display of trust, his smug grin never wavering. He dismissively agrees to watch and see if any recovery actually takes place, clearly unconvinced of any potential threat. He follows this with a casual, cruel kick to a discarded bag on the ground, making his intentions clear. Even if his rival manages to stand back up, he will simply crush him once more. The town stands quiet in the distance, oblivious to the cruel vow and the shattered spirit left in the wake of the noble's departure. The town remains indifferent to the personal turmoil of its inhabitants as the day winds down, the streets quiet and unassuming. Inside a quiet room, the only sound is the rhythmic creak of floorboards under a heavy, uncertain step as the weight of recent events settles in. He stares blankly, the revelation that Polaris already has a lover cutting deeper than any physical wound. The weight of it finally breaks his composure, and he collapses onto the edge of his bed, questioning why this news is so devastating to his spirit. In his mind's eye, she is surrounded by a perfect circle of support. The strongest adventurers, a dedicated personal craftsman, and a partner to stand by her side in battle. He watches her back in his memories, realizing she is already whole and has more than enough companions without him. There seems to be no logical reason for her to have waited all this time. A sharp pang of doubt strikes him as he recalls her younger self admitting she once needed him around. He begins to wonder if her current loyalty is merely born of pity, a sense of obligation, or a lingering promise from a time long past. Outside, the night air is still, but the muffled sound of sobbing drifts from a small, lonely house on the outskirts of the village. He remembers finding her like that years ago, her face streaked with tears and her spirit broken. In that moment of shared vulnerability, he had desperately urged her to run away with him, seeking a life far from their current pain. He pleaded with her, his voice trembling with urgency as he insisted they flee. He couldn't stand the thought of her remaining with her abusive father a moment longer. When she fearfully questioned where they could possibly go, he desperately promised they would find a place, anywhere that wasn't here. As they scrambled to make their escape, a dark shadow loomed over them. Her father's voice boomed through the air, demanding to know what they were doing as he caught them in the act of fleeing. The confrontation turned violent instantly. A heavy object shattered against the wall, sending shards flying as she let out a piercing scream. Her father roared in a blind rage, accusing them of destroying the house. He loomed over the trembling children, his massive fist clenched and ready to strike again. The sheer size of the man made their attempt at defiance seem tragically small as they huddled together in terror. Despite the fear, a resolve hardened within the young boy. As they looked down the long, uncertain path ahead of them, he vowed to protect her, no matter where their journey took them. Walking side by side into their new life, he reminded her of the dream they shared. He spoke of the future, of the day they would turn 10 and finally become the greatest adventurers the world had ever seen. It wasn't long before her latent potential manifested. She discovered she possessed a gift called Silver World, a power that allowed her to command ice itself. Her eyes sparkled with a newfound hope as she realized just how powerful she could become. Years later, that same spark remained as she excitedly shared news of her rising rank, her sights set firmly on becoming the #1 adventurer. Yet, as he watched her, a heavy realization weighed on him. Despite everything they had achieved, he felt it still wasn't enough. He jolts awake, the morning light filtering through the window as he wipes sweat from his brow. The dream he just had feels pathetic, a lingering shadow of a past he'd rather forget, and he can't help but feel a sense of shame at his own perceived weakness. Still shaken by the memories, he makes his way to the courtyard well, muttering to himself about how truly embarrassing his subconscious can be. Reaching the stone basin, he plunges his hands into the cool water and splashes his face vigorously, trying to wash away the remnants of sleep and the sting of his thoughts. As the water ripples, his mind drifts back to Polaris. He begins to suspect that the only reason she still cares for him is her rigid nature. She simply isn't the type of person who would ever disregard a promise, even one made long ago. Staring at his own reflection in the shimmering surface, a wave of guilt washes over him. He realizes how incredibly rude he was to Ryuka, having left so abruptly without a word, and knows he needs to offer a proper apology. Determined to make things right, he finds the young inventor at her campsite and immediately offers a deep, sincere apology for his behavior. She, however, is as cheerful as ever, telling him not to worry about it and welcoming him back with a wide smile. She mentions that his sudden departure after spacing out had left her a bit concerned, but her mood shifts to pure excitement as she reveals a surprise. The equipment they had discussed only the day before is already finished, and she eagerly encourages him to try it on. The revelation leaves him completely floored, his face contorted in shock that such a feat was possible in just 24 hours. She explains with a grin that she simply got caught up in the work, pushing herself to a speed far beyond her normal limits once she got into the rhythm of it. He looked down at the table, marveling at the speed and skill of the young artisan. Everything was laid out perfectly, ready for him to try. Stepping into the new attire, he adjusted the fit, wondering if he was wearing it correctly as the fabric settled against his skin. The transformation was complete. The suit was a masterpiece of engineering, designed specifically to complement his unique combat style. A reinforced headband protected his head from the bites of monsters, while magic-infused plates provided a solid defense at key points. Despite the protection, the use of lightweight special fibers ensured his mobility remained unhindered. Most impressively, the gear featured a shape memory function, allowing it to automatically repair itself if damaged, a necessity for someone diving into B-rank dungeons with C-rank materials. He moved tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, amazed by the incredible lightness of the ensemble. Ryuka, watching with a satisfied grin, prompted him to test the clothing's regeneration feature next. As he activated the function, the tattered remnants of his previous skirmish seemed to meld away, the fabric knitting itself back together before his eyes. He was stunned by the efficiency of the mechanism. The young woman told him he could put the extra features away for now, though she couldn't help but admire the aesthetic of the wings she had integrated. However, the sheer quality of the craftsmanship began to weigh on his mind. He voiced his concern about the cost, knowing that such advanced gear, even made from C-rank materials, must be incredibly expensive. His companion dismissed his worries, telling him to view it as an investment in his future success. She laughed, adding that while this set was a gift, she would certainly be charging him for the next one. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and encouragement as she told him to get stronger and earn enough money to pay her back. He nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Yet, as the initial excitement faded, she noticed the lingering shadows in his expression. She sighed, realizing that despite the new gear, he was still carrying the weight of his recent failures. He is caught completely off guard when Ryuka bluntly asks if he was in love with Polaris. The question hits him like a physical blow, his eyes widening in shock as his most private feelings are suddenly laid bare. The realization that his internal struggle was so transparent to her leaves him speechless, his composure shattering in an instant. Essen stands alone, the weight of his unspoken feelings for Polaris finally coming to the surface. He wonders if that's what it was all along, the hidden emotions he's been carrying that are finally being revealed to himself. Seeing his distress, Ryuka asks if that was truly what he was thinking. He confirms it, prompting her to remark that anyone would have noticed, given how obviously depressed he appeared to be. She watches him closely as he sinks into a crouch, his posture radiating a heavy sense of exhaustion and defeat. Offering a sympathetic ear, she tells him he can talk to her about it if he wishes. He remains hunched over, admitting that in his line of work, he sees many people reach their breaking point and quit being adventurers. He continues his somber reflection, listing the various ways people break. Those blessed with gifts who are betrayed by their own allies, strong warriors who never recover from the loss of a comrade, and those who simply despair as they reach the limits of their own potential. As he speaks, he picks up a small, hard-shelled nut, noting that while everyone who risks their life against monsters must be mentally and physically strong, everyone has a limit to their willpower. With a sudden, precise strike, the shell is shattered, sending fragments flying as the core is exposed. Ryuka looks down at the broken shell in her hand as he concludes his thought, stating that no matter how resilient or hard something may seem, it always has a vulnerable weak point. She stares down at the shattered shell in her hand, listening as he explains that the contents within are far more delicate than the exterior. Because of this vulnerability, he slumps forward, resting his head on his arms as he compares his own broken spirit to the exposed meat of that walnut. In response, she gazes at him with soft, empathetic eyes, gently suggesting that there is no reason for him to carry such a heavy burden by himself, and that leaning on those around him is a sign of strength, not weakness. He remains quiet for a moment, staring into the flickering flames of the campfire before admitting a difficult truth. He isn't even certain if his feelings for Polaris were truly love or simply a sense of duty. Continuing his story, he elaborates on their past, noting that before she received her special gift, she was remarkably frail, which only fueled his intense need to shield her from the world. This protective instinct was born from witnessing her tragic childhood, where the loss of her mother drove her father to alcoholism and violence, leaving her to endure his outbursts in silence. Unable to witness her suffering any longer, he eventually reached his limit and made the choice to take her and flee their village forever, leaving behind the only life they had known. Looking back on that pivotal moment, he recalls the solemn promise they made to one another so long ago, that they would become the greatest adventurers the world had ever seen, standing side by side. He sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows as he confessed his deepest insecurities. He admitted that while he had been left behind once, he had clung to a promise to keep moving forward. However, the sudden appearance of that man, Keith, claiming to be Polaris's lover, had shaken him to his core, draining the very strength from his limbs in a way that surprised even him. His confession was met with a blunt observation from Ryuka, who identified the feeling immediately as jealousy. He didn't try to deny it, quietly acknowledging that the green-eyed monster had indeed taken hold of his heart. She let out a boisterous laugh, finding his predicament almost comical. With a heavy sigh, she teased him for being so pathetic, yet her tone remained lighthearted as she assured him that such feelings were perfectly normal. Her laughter didn't ease his mind, and Essen remained unconvinced, brooding over the idea that his noble promise was nothing more than a convenient excuse to mask these petty, lame emotions. She quickly cut him off, firmly stating that his self-deprecating assessment was far from the truth. He looked up as she leaned in, her expression bright and encouraging as she explained that the ability to recognize and voice one's darker feelings was a sign of strength, not weakness. Despite her optimism, he couldn't help but wonder if he would ever find the motivation to continue his journey if his original purpose was compromised. She sensed his hesitation and told him plainly that there was no reason to change his original motivation, regardless of the new complications. She continued to prod him, playfully calling him a presumptuous man for essentially kidnapping Polaris without ever considering her own wishes. She challenged him directly, asking if he was truly prepared to abandon his quest simply because the girl he cared for supposedly already had someone else in her life. Her words struck a chord, and he clenched his fist tightly as a new resolve began to take shape. He finally admitted to himself and to her that, despite everything, he truly didn't want to give up. He speaks with a newfound clarity, explaining that his past actions were driven by genuine care and a desire to protect her. He admits his goal is to catch up and stand beside her as an equal, sharing their lives as adventurers. However, his resolve falters slightly as he wonders if he might just be a burden, prompting a sharp rebuke from his companion to stop wavering and keep his spirit high. Seeing his hesitation, she leans in with a mischievous grin and proposes a radical solution. She could become his new motivation, even offering to be his girlfriend. The suggestion leaves him utterly speechless, but she is already lost in her own bizarre fantasies, imagining the strange and tactile experiences she could have with the pseudo-monsters he creates. Her excitement only grows as she realizes the endless possibilities of his unique power, noting that the variety of creatures he can produce will only continue to expand. While she marvels at the potential for these strange encounters, he can only stare in wide-eyed disbelief at the direction her thoughts have taken. Quickly shifting gears, she laughs it off as a mere joke, though he remains unconvinced of her sincerity. He vehemently denies having such peculiar interests, leading to a frantic chase as he tries to escape her playful, yet terrifying, advances. Once the chaos subsides, she looks at him with a softer expression, simply asking if he feels better after their exchange. He offers a sincere word of thanks, acknowledging that her eccentric methods actually helped clear his mind. She brushes it off, admitting she hates seeing a friend in such a state, while jokingly reminding him to become a wealthy adventurer so he can spend money at her shop. With his spirit finally restored, he declares his intent to give it his all once more, bolstered by her enthusiastic support. Essen stands amidst the chaos of battle, his new gear glinting as he faces a monstrous foe in a dark, shadowed forest. He propels himself into the sky, meeting a feathered predator head-on with a calculated strike. The impact is devastating, sending the beast spiraling toward the earth in a spray of dark ichor. 3 weeks have passed since the completion of his specialized equipment, a period of intense growth and exploration across the countryside. He has spent this time delving into numerous dungeons, mastering formidable techniques like the Valley Griffin's Sky Dash, which allows him to kick off the air from mid-air jumps, and the petrifying gaze of the wetland basilisk's evil eye. The young adventurer feels a surge of confidence, his strength having reached levels far beyond his previous limits as he approaches the guild's notice board to see how his efforts have impacted his standing. He offers a friendly greeting to Iru, inquiring about her well-being while noting that his rank has surged to 50,553, placing him on the cusp of the intermediate tier, which begins at 50,000. She expresses genuine amazement at his rapid ascent, praising his dedication, which prompts him to request further dungeon recommendations now that he has successfully cleared almost everything she previously suggested. He looks surprised as the receptionist suggests a change of pace. While dungeon exploration is his usual routine, she leans in and proposes a different kind of job for a change, catching him off guard. She explains that the guild occasionally offers assignments outside of the usual dungeon crawls, a fact not widely known to the public. With a bright smile and a formal air, she requests his assistance with a specific guild task that requires a reliable hand. Despite the offer, his focus remains fixed on his primary goal, climbing the ranks as quickly as possible. Sensing his hesitation, She quickly adds that the compensation for this particular assignment is exceptionally generous, hoping to sway his practical mind. She continues her persuasion, arguing that even the most dedicated adventurers need time away from the dark depths of dungeons to clear their minds. It is precisely when things are going well, she warns with a stern finger raised, that one must be most careful not to burn out. With a playful wink, she urges him to view the task not as hard labor, but as a much-needed break. He pauses, looking into her eyes and considering her words and the sincerity in her request. Finally, he relents and agrees to take on the assignment. Her face lights up with joy at his decision, and she cheers for his cooperation while he begins to mentally prepare for this new type of challenge. As he makes his way out to gather his gear, he can't help but wonder exactly what kind of preparation this mysterious guild assignment will require, leaving the guild hall behind. Meanwhile, several days earlier at the wellness mansion, the high-ranking adventurer Keith lounges in irritation. He is incensed to learn that the man he considers trash hasn't given up. Instead, reports suggest he is more motivated than ever, a fact that causes Keith to slam his fist down in frustration while his subordinates look on. He lounged back, a glass in hand, his expression one of bored irritation. His mind drifted to his previous schemes, reflecting on how he had intended to crush Polaris's resolve by targeting the very thing she held dear. As he toyed with his sharp blade, he mused that if psychological warfare failed, a more direct approach might be necessary, simply killing the target. His companion, the bespectacled adventurer, voiced his concern, questioning the potential fallout of such a drastic move. He countered with a chilling reminder that even a man of his standing couldn't escape the judgment of the Travel God Church if he were to commit murder. The weight of the law seemed to be the only thing momentarily tempering his lethal intent. Turning a sharp, calculating gaze toward his subordinate, he questioned why the man assumed he would dirty his own hands. He reminded the sweating adventurer that his role extended far beyond mere surveillance and reporting. He asserted that such dirty work was precisely the subordinate's domain. His own recent visit to their target had been driven by nothing more than a cruel desire to witness the man's pathetic expression firsthand. He offered a choice that was no choice at all. The subordinate could refuse, but it would mean immediate expulsion from the party. With a sinister undertone, he warned the man to ensure that no misfortune befell his family, effectively sealing the threat. As he began to walk away, he mentioned having recently acquired something of great interest. He claimed that, in his supposed kindness, he would provide a means for the task to be completed without the subordinate needing to strike a direct blow. He revealed a dark, swirling orb, its surface shimmering with an ominous energy. This mysterious artifact was clearly the key to the next phase of his malicious plan. He smirks, referring to the dark object as a secret weapon, while his subordinate looks on with visible trepidation, questioning the nature of the item. Meanwhile, Iruru joins Essen in the town square, apologizing for the delay and asking if he's ready to set out on their scheduled task. She informs him that his role for the day is to act as her personal escort, a task that confuses him since monsters rarely appear within the city walls, but she insists it is necessary. They move into the more dilapidated streets of the lower district, as she explains that monsters are not the only danger one might encounter, hinting at the human threats lurking in the shadows. He questions why their work would bring them to such a grim and dangerous area, and she clarifies that the presence of many rough characters makes having a capable protector like him a necessity. She continues by detailing the guild's regular responsibilities, explaining that they must conduct welfare checks on adventurers who have become inactive to ensure they are safe. They discuss how the guild focuses its efforts on those who haven't utilized their services in some time, a duty he finds surprisingly demanding and vital for the community. He pledges to protect her with his life during their rounds, a sincere and determined vow that brings a warm, appreciative smile to her face. He walks alongside Iruru, who expresses her amazement at his navigation skills. She wonders if he has a map memorized, but he humbly clarifies that his success is due to his unique gift, Guide, which ensures he always chooses the correct path. This ability is distinct from standard combat skills, functioning more as a specialized tracking tool. Beyond simple navigation, it allows him to locate lost items or even track down the owners of those items, making him an invaluable asset for non-combat tasks. With the final name on the welfare checklist crossed off, the day's primary objective is complete. He marks the paper with a sense of finality, satisfied that every inactive adventurer on their route has been accounted for. Iruru expresses her gratitude, noting how smoothly the mission proceeded because of his assistance. He remains modest, assuring her that he is happy to help whenever needed, reinforcing the bond of trust between the guild staff and the adventurer. As they prepare to go their separate ways, she bids him a warm farewell and urges him to stay safe on his journey back. He thanks her for her concern, the two of them parting on excellent terms after a productive afternoon. Now alone, he considers his next move, deciding that a bit of shopping is in order before he finally retires for the evening. He waves a final goodbye to the receding figures, his mind already turning toward the supplies he needs to restock. The sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the city's rooftops as the bustle of the day starts to quiet down. Birds fly in the distance, signaling the transition from a busy workday to a peaceful evening. He eventually reaches his rental apartment, feeling accomplished after restocking his daily necessities and adventuring gear. However, his mood shifts to annoyance when he spots something stuck to his door, wondering who would play such a prank on a rental property. He stares in disbelief at the parchment pinned to his door by a cold blade. The message is a chilling ultimatum. They have taken the receptionist who is by his side, and if he wishes to see her alive, he must venture to the abandoned warehouse in the back alley. The shock of the threat leaves him breathless, his mind racing as he tries to process the sudden danger Iruru is in. Essen stands alone in the quiet hallway, the weight of a sudden crisis pressing down on him. A threatening note has been left behind, revealing the unthinkable. Iruru has been kidnapped. He clutches the letter tightly, his eyes widening as he recognizes the object found with it. It is the very hairpin Iruru always wore, a chilling confirmation of the message's validity. Frustration boils over as he realizes the danger she is in, his mind racing to understand who would do such a thing. Driven by a desperate urgency, he sprints through the streets, his mind racing with a single, haunting question. What could have possibly happened to her? The trail leads him to a desolate, industrial area on the outskirts of town. He pauses before a weathered warehouse, the location specified in the ransom note, wondering why anyone would choose such a godforsaken place for their crime and what their true motive for taking Iruru could be. Stealing his resolve, he approaches the entrance with caution. He peers through the gaps in the structure, his heart hammering against his ribs as he prepares himself for whatever horrors might be waiting inside. Within the dim, cavernous interior, the grim reality is laid bare. Iruru sits bound and gagged on the cold floor, while her captor, the arrogant Keith, sits casually beside her, a massive blade resting across his lap. Essen bursts through the doors, his voice echoing through the warehouse as he calls out her name in a mixture of relief and fury. Keith merely looks up, a smug, expectant grin spreading across his face as he notes that the young man has finally arrived as planned. He stands his ground and declares his intent to rescue her, demanding to know if she is unharmed. Iruru can only offer muffled cries of distress, while Keith acknowledges his arrival with a chillingly calm recognition. His trap finally sprung. He grits his teeth, ready to strike, but the sight of a blade pressed against Iruru's throat forces him to halt. Keith warns him not to move, his voice cold and commanding as he demands the young adventurer stay exactly where he is. He watches as Keith questions the reason for this confrontation, noting that they should be complete strangers. The older man seems amused by the situation, his smirk widening as he looks down at his opponent from amidst the crates. The boy listens in confusion as Keith continues, clarifying the situation after seeing the bewilderment on his face. He learns that a man named Wellness ordered his elimination because he intends to claim Polaris for himself, and the young adventurer is seen as an obstacle. He is stunned by the revelation, struggling to reconcile the news with what he thought he knew about Polaris and Wellness being lovers. Keith scoffs at his disbelief, revealing that the supposed relationship was a farce and that he has been coerced into this dirty work. The realization that Iruru was merely bait used to lure him into this trap hits him with the force of a physical blow. He stares at his captor, who confirms this grim reality, stating that since Polaris continues to resist, he has no choice but to end the boy's life here. He hears Keith go on to describe Wellness's true nature, painting a picture of a man who manipulates low-ranked adventurers to gain followers. The explanation reveals how Wellness uses others to prevent people from forming parties and resorts to violence against anyone who refuses to comply. He finally understands the lie about the lovers and realizes Polaris was trying to protect him from getting hurt unnecessarily. The weight of the truth is heavy, and he feels a surge of guilt knowing that Iruru is now a hostage solely because of his involvement. The young man stands frozen as Keith tightens his grip on Iruru, acknowledging that the situation is now perfectly clear. The warehouse remains tense as the confrontation reaches its breaking point, with the lives of both captives hanging in the balance. He watched with a cold, detached expression as his opponent pleaded for the hostage's safety. Essen argued that since he was the true target, there was no reason to keep the receptionist captive, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The veteran adventurer, unfazed by the plea, snapped at the younger man to be silent. The youth pressed further, questioning if blindly following Wellness's orders was truly what he wanted, and warned that even if he succeeded in killing him, the travel god church would eventually hunt him down. He remained resolute, declaring that he had no other choice in the matter. His only objective was to keep his target pinned down right where he was, exactly as his master had commanded, regardless of the moral cost. He watched his opponent's desperation grow, ignoring the demand to release the girl as he reached into his gear. He produced a small, dark sphere, a sinister smirk spreading across his face as he prepared his next move. The object was revealed to be a magic sealing jewel, a secret weapon provided by Wellness that contained a powerful, sealed monster. By using this artifact, he boasted that he would be absolved of any crime, as the death would be attributed to a wild beast rather than his own hand. As the jewel began to emit a blinding, white light, he predicted a grim end for his opponent, a victim of a monster that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. From the heart of the radiance, a massive, toothy maw erupted with a deafening roar, tearing through the fabric of reality. The beast fully manifested, a towering titan of destruction that dwarfed the battlefield as it prepared to strike. It towers over them, a terrifying volcano dragon unleashed from the jewel. Keith cackles with sadistic glee, marveling at the power of the A-rank beast he has summoned, noting its extreme danger even among its kind. Essen can only stare in disbelief as the massive predator looms. Without warning, the creature strikes, its massive form a blur of scales and fury. The force of its movement sends debris flying, and in the chaos, the very man who summoned it is caught in its path, his laughter silenced by the sudden, violent reality of the monster's power. He struggles to comprehend how such a feat of summoning is even possible, but quickly pushes the thought aside. There is no time for questions as his eyes lock onto Gru, who stands frozen in the dragon's shadow. With a desperate cry, he calls out her name, his focus shifting entirely to her safety. He lunges forward, his boots kicking up dust as he races toward the girl. Every second counts as the ground trembles beneath the weight of the nearby beast. Reaching her side, he urgently checks for injuries, but she is too shaken to speak clearly. Her eyes are wide with horror, fixed on the dragon as it prepares to feast upon the fallen Keith, the predator's primal instincts taking over. He commands her to flee while she still has the chance, but she hesitates, asking what will become of him. She pleads for them to escape together, her voice trembling with fear for both their lives as the situation grows increasingly dire. She argues that they must call for high-ranking adventurers, pointing out that a volcano dragon possesses the strength to kill even intermediate warriors in an instant. Despite her logical plea, he remains steadfast, refusing to abandon his position. With a look of grim determination, he declares his intent to hold the monster back alone. His eyes burn with a fierce resolve, knowing that he is the only thing standing between the dragon and the innocent people nearby. He insists that they cannot allow such a creature to roam free, urging the receptionist to flee and summon reinforcements. She hesitates, her concern for him evident in her wide, uncertain eyes as she struggles with the thought of leaving him behind. Despite his outward bravado, a quiet admission flickers through his mind. The urge to flee is real, yet he knows the devastation would be far worse if he abandoned his post now. A faint, resolute smile touches his lips as he accepts the burden of his choice. Tightening his grip and adjusting his gear, the young man declares his intent to stand his ground. He has learned that strength is forged in the moments he refuses to retreat, a philosophy that has guided him through every trial and made him who he is today. Seeing her lingering fear, he offers a reassuring grin and a thumbs up, promising not to be reckless. He vows to make his escape should the situation become truly dire, attempting to lighten the heavy atmosphere with a flash of his usual confidence. His words strike a chord deep within her, and her eyes shimmer with unshed tears as she witnesses the depth of his courage. Wiping away the moisture from her cheek, she finally finds her voice and nods in agreement, accepting the gravity of the task he has taken upon himself. As she sprints away toward the city to find advanced adventurers, she cries out a final plea for him to stay alive. Turning his full attention back to the looming threat, he prepares himself, telling the beast it is time to face him. Before him, the massive volcano dragon shifts its weight, its scales glistening like cooling magma as it prepares to unleash its fury upon the lone defender. It looms over him, an avatar of pure, intimidating pressure that feels almost physical. Essen grits his teeth, wondering if Polaris has always faced such overwhelming odds alone. Suddenly, the beast snaps its massive jaws, lunging forward with terrifying speed. The force of the impact sends him reeling, his body barely a blur against the creature's massive bulk. He cries out in pain as he is slammed into the stone floor, the sheer power of the dragon's movement shattering the ground around him. He struggles to catch his breath, coughing up blood as the reality of the situation sinks in. The monster is simply too strong, far beyond anything he has ever encountered, and he curses his own weakness as he tries to push himself back up. Despite the agony, a desperate plan begins to form in his mind. If he can somehow close the distance and get within reach, he might be able to use his unique ability to steal the creature's gift, turning the tide of this hopeless battle. With a surge of resolve, he unleashes an air cannon, the blast of compressed air tearing through the space between them. It is a gamble, a momentary distraction meant to create the opening he so desperately needs. The smoke clears to reveal the dragon standing completely unscathed, the attack having failed to leave even a scratch on its armored hide. His eyes widen in shock as he realizes that his most potent strike didn't affect the beast at all. This is the volcano dragon, a legendary inhabitant of the volcano of destruction known for its impenetrable scales and devastating fire breath. Essen realizes with sinking dread that with his current repertoire of skills, he possesses no weapon capable of piercing its natural armor. Faced with the impossible, he doesn't retreat, but instead prepares for one final, reckless gambit. If conventional means won't work, he will have to find another way to survive. He stood his ground against the massive beast, a desperate plan forming in his mind. He shouted a challenge, declaring his intent to turn the creature's own overwhelming strength against it. With a defiant grin, he dared the dragon to unleash its scorching flames directly at him, bracing for the impact as he prepared to execute his gamble. As the dragon obliged with a torrent of incinerating heat, he channeled the energy back at the beast, roaring for the monster to taste its own power. The resulting explosion rocked the surroundings, a testament to his refusal to yield even when faced with a legendary foe, proving that the path to strength is paved with such unwavering resolve. The peace of the city is shattered by a sudden, violent tremor that sends citizens stumbling. Keith and Iruru look around in alarm, wondering if an earthquake has struck the district. They watch as, moments later, a massive plume of dark smoke billows into the sky from the heart of the urban district. Reeling from a shock, they watch as a secondary explosion rips through the air, the force of it nearly knocking them off their feet. Keith stares at the source, questioning if someone is using a powerful gift in such a crowded place. Staring upward, they look in terror as a colossal winged beast emerges from the center of the chaos, its massive form casting a shadow over the crumbling buildings. The sheer pressure from its wings sends debris flying, leaving the seasoned adventurer stunned by its overwhelming power. He is joined by Essen, who urgently shouts for everyone to evacuate the area immediately. The young man's face is etched with a grim realization of the threat they now face. Recognizing the creature, he identifies it as the legendary volcano dragon, a beast of immense destructive capability. The monster lets out a deafening roar as it begins its assault on the city. It continues its rampage, leaving a trail of smoke and fire in its wake as the skyline is obscured by the rising dust of fallen structures. It slams its massive clawed foot into the ground with a final, earth-shattering thud, sealing the fate of the immediate surroundings. It looms over the devastated cityscape, a titan of scales and smoke. Below, Essen stares in paralyzed horror, his mind reeling as he calculates the staggering loss of life caused by a single, catastrophic breath from the beast. He snaps out of his stupor just as a massive, clawed foot descends, threatening to crush him into the cobblestones. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he throws himself aside, the ground trembling under the weight of the monster's stride. The young adventurer knows that if he fails here, the death toll will only climb. Gritting his teeth against the heat and fear, he launches himself into the air, his blade trailing a desperate arc as he strikes at the creature's massive, lashing tail. His steel meets the dragon's hide with a jarring impact, but instead of the satisfying bite of a blade, there is only the harsh ring of metal on something far harder than stone. Sparks fly as the weapon skids harmlessly across the leathery surface of the wing. He stares in disbelief at the unscathed membrane, the realization sinking in that his strongest efforts are barely a nuisance to the titan. The dragon doesn't even acknowledge the strike, its predatory gaze fixed on the city beyond. In response to his strike, the beast retaliates. A series of blinding explosions erupt around the boy, the sheer force of the concussive blasts tearing through the air. He is thrown back like a ragdoll, his cries of agony swallowed by the deafening roar of the inferno. He collapses onto the scorched earth, his body broken and his vision blurring as smoke rises from his singed clothes. As the dragon towers over the ruins in the distance, a dark thought crosses his mind. He wonders if this is truly the end of his journey. Just as his hope begins to flicker out, a mocking voice cuts through the chaos, calling him pathetic. A sudden, violent surge of energy slams into the dragon, a powerful intervention that forces the monster back and signals the arrival of a familiar, arrogant ally. He stands firm, his presence alone pushing back the overwhelming pressure radiating from the volcano dragon. Essen, battered and on the ground, looks up in disbelief, the familiar voice cutting through the roar of the beast. With a powerful impact, the warrior lands, the ground cracking beneath his feet as he creates a barrier between the monster and his fallen comrade. The dragon recoils, momentarily halted by this sudden display of strength. Turning with a confident smirk, he greets the stunned Essen, laughing off the gravity of the situation. Essen can barely find the words, stammering out the name of the man who just saved his life. He begins to explain his timely arrival, recounting how he had been at the guild on business when the receptionist burst in, her face pale with panic. She had been desperate for high-ranked adventurers to respond to an emergency. The memory of the guild hall remains vivid. The receptionist had reported a volcano dragon appearing in a back alley warehouse, mentioning that a lower-ranked adventurer was currently the only thing standing in its way. When he heard the name Essen, he knew he couldn't stay away. Proclaiming himself the strongest, he declares that he decided to lend his strength to the cause. He looks down at Essen with a mix of pride and rivalry, admitting that despite everything, he still feels he owes him a debt. Essen, despite his injuries, warns him of the danger, pointing out that their ranks aren't actually that far apart. He scoffs at the notion, telling Essen not to talk nonsense while the threat still looms. Keith reveals that he hasn't been idle, having recently broken through to B rank through relentless training. While he mocks Essen's current state, he admits that Essen is the only peer he truly acknowledges, challenging him to survive this and eventually catch up to his new level of power. He stands ready, a fierce grin cutting through the grime on his face as he accepts the challenge. Beside him, his companion mirrors that resolve, the two of them finally standing on equal footing against the looming threat. He watches as Essen cracks his knuckles, both of them eager for their first proper team-up in years. They stand side by side, a seasoned veteran and a rising star, prepare to face the beast as a team once more. They are suddenly forced to brace themselves as the air erupts in a blinding flash of draconic fury. The ground trembles under the weight of the incoming assault, signaling the start of a brutal confrontation. They witness the earth itself incinerate under the blast, turning the battlefield into a scorched wasteland. Stunned by the scale of the destruction, the younger warrior realizes that the heat alone is enough to melt stone. The younger warrior, Essen, struggles to find his footing in the smoke, realizing the dragon has terraformed the area into a domain of fire. It's a tactical move that proves high-rank monsters are as cunning as they are powerful. He can only watch in amazement as Keith charges directly into the heart of the inferno, declaring himself Keith of the Scorching Sun, the master of the flames who commands the fire rather than fearing it. He sees the dragon roar in response to the challenge, the beast's wings beating against the superheated air as it prepares to double down on its assault against the defiant humans. He then listens as Keith explains that his survival is due to a specific blessing he sought out to withstand the intensity of his own gift, admitting he is still a work in progress despite his overwhelming display of power. He continues the assault, but Essen interrupts with a desperate suggestion to use a combination attack they practiced before. Keith is hesitant, recalling how that same move barely scratched a much weaker monster in the past, and doubts it will have any effect on the behemoth before them. While Keith remains skeptical, Essen begins to analyze their situation with newfound clarity, realizing that even Keith's explosive flames are failing to flinch the B-rank dragon. He starts to wonder if stacking their skills together might be the only way to bridge the massive power gap. Looking down his own hand, a sudden epiphany strikes him. His gift doesn't just grant him monster traits, it fundamentally transforms his body into one, meaning he shouldn't be restricted to using only one skill at a time. He had been switching between them instinctively, never considering the possibility of simultaneous activation. With this realization, he calls out to his companion, his mind racing with the potential of this discovery. He wonders why it took him so long to understand that if he can use two skills at once, he can create something entirely new. Acting on this theory, he begins to channel his energy, merging the attributes of sharpness, weight, and toughness into a single, devastating form. A massive blade of pure energy erupts from his arm, crackling with power as he evolves his existing abilities into a brand new skill. With a thunderous roar, he lunges forward, unleashing the monster eater greatsword directly at the volcano dragon's head. As the massive blow connects, he feels a surge of confidence, knowing that his potential for growth is far greater than he ever imagined. The young adventurer lunges at the massive beast, his strike landing with explosive force. The creature lets out a deafening roar of pain as the impact ripples through its scaly hide. Nearby, Keith watches in disbelief, questioning how such a feat was possible. The monster recoils, its eye wide with shock as the blow connects. The seasoned adventurer can hardly believe his eyes, realizing that the attack actually penetrated the beast's formidable defenses. Essen, breathing heavily, stares at his own hands, stunned that his strike was effective. He hears Keith's shouts of encouragement, urging him to keep up the pressure. With a determined shout, the young warrior charges forward once more, his resolve hardened by the success of his previous strike. He delivers a devastating blow directly to the monster's snout, the force of the impact sending a shockwave through the air. The creature's head is snapped back by the sheer power of the assault. Despite the successful hit, the monster's sheer mass proves difficult to overcome, and Essen is sent skidding backward across the ground. His companion calls out his name in concern, watching as the young adventurer struggles to maintain his footing. His hands begin to glow with an intense heat, the flames licking at his skin. He tells Keith not to worry about him, even as the fire threatens to break through his magical resistances. He stands his ground, engulfed in a swirling vortex of energy and heat. With a defiant grin, he declares that he is well acquainted with this kind of pain, his spirit unbroken by the searing intensity of his own power. Without a moment's hesitation, he lunges back into the fray, surrounded by a trail of fire. He commands Keith to continue the assault with everything he has, refusing to hold back as they face the monstrous threat together. He lunges forward with desperate intensity, his face gritted in determination as he strikes at the massive beast. Beside him, Keith maintains his own assault, the two of them working in a frantic rhythm to bring the creature down. Gritting his teeth, he whispers to himself that they only need a little more to succeed. The monster lets out a guttural cry of agony as the relentless pressure begins to take its toll. Keith shouts that they should be able to finish it off soon, but his optimism is short-lived as the beast begins to thrash violently once more. The creature unleashes a powerful burst of wind pressure, forcing the adventurers back. Essen struggles to maintain his footing, realizing that at this rate, he won't be able to follow up his attack in midair. The massive beast suddenly shifts its focus, lunging toward a nearby structure with terrifying speed. It seems intent on escape, or perhaps it has found a new target amidst the chaos of the town. With a deafening crash, the creature slams into a small workshop, its sheer mass splintering the wood and stone like dry twigs. Essen stares in disbelief as the dust settles, his mind racing to comprehend the sudden turn of events. Above the ruins, the monster lets out a triumphant roar, its presence looming over the destruction it has wrought. His eyes widen in horror as the realization of what has been destroyed sinks in. Looking at the wreckage, Keith realizes with a jolt that the beast has crushed Ryuka's workshop. Nearby, onlookers cry out in confusion and fear, wondering what this creature is and how it can possibly fly. He looks on in disbelief as Ryuka bursts onto the scene, her face alight with a manic sort of glee. She exclaims that she rushed over the moment she heard a dangerous monster was in town, refusing to let such a golden opportunity slip away. When he asks if she came to their rescue, she simply laughs, her excitement far outweighing any sense of peril. The moment of levity is shattered as the massive volcano dragon lunges, its sheer size causing the ground to tremble. Keith bellows a warning for them to watch out, but Ryuka is too captivated by the sight of a living dragon to move. The beast's impact sends a shockwave through the area, catching the young warrior off guard as he is thrown back by the force of the blast. Frustrated by her lack of urgency, the seasoned adventurer snaps that this is hardly the time for admiration. Despite the imminent danger, she remains starstruck, her eyes wide as she marvels at the creature's power. Stunned and struggling to find words, the young man can only watch the chaotic exchange. The beast's rampage continues unabated, its massive claws tearing through the structures of the lower district. Reality finally sets in for the girl as she realizes her workshop has been reduced to splinters in the wake of the monster's path. Gritting his teeth against the pain, the warrior prepares himself for the next onslaught. As the dust begins to settle, a group of familiar faces emerges from the shadows of the ruined buildings. They call out to the one they once mocked as the eternal last place, declaring their intent to join the fray. Despite their lower rank, they stand tall, ready to defend their home alongside him. He is visibly shaken by their sudden appearance, questioning why they would risk their lives in such a lopsided battle. Even the arrogant veteran is stunned to see the lower-ranked guild members rallying in the face of such overwhelming odds. The air is thick with tension as the group prepares to make their stand. Among the reinforcements is the guild's kind receptionist, her presence a beacon of hope amidst the destruction. She explains that everyone rushed over the moment they heard he was in trouble, though one of the adventurers quickly adds that they aren't just there for his sake. Their shared resolve begins to shift the atmosphere of the battlefield. They explain that they cannot simply wait for high-ranked heroes while their own district is being wiped off the map. As adventurers themselves, they felt a surge of pride and duty upon hearing that the man they once ridiculed was standing his ground. Inspired by his courage, they refused to hide any longer, choosing instead to fight for the town they call home. He and his companions watch in awe as Essen stands his ground, his resolve unshaken despite the overwhelming odds. Ryuka marvels at how they've managed to hold the line, while the other adventurers question the sanity of such a reckless stand, yet they cannot help but be moved by the sheer bravery on display. Battered, but wearing a confident smirk, the young man prepares for his next move. He watches as the young warrior turns to Keith and proposes a daring and dangerous gambit. He wants the fire mage to use his explosive flames to launch him directly at the beast like a human cannonball. The mage is momentarily taken aback, calling the plan pure insanity, but the fighter remains firm, insisting it is their only path to victory. Accepting the risk, his companion decides to put his trust in the wild plan. With a determined shout, they charge forward together, the mage gathering his power as they close the distance to the towering volcano dragon. He watches as the fighter hurtles through the air, realizing that even a beast this large must have a vulnerability. Activating the evil eye ability he gained from the wetland basilisk, the warrior focuses his gaze to petrify a specific, vital part of the dragon's body, knowing he lacks the power to turn the entire massive creature to stone. His strike is catastrophic, combining incredible momentum with localized petrification to deliver a blow that shatters a massive portion of a dragon's head. The creature lets out a deafening roar of agony as it reels from the critical strike. With its strength spent, the beast finally collapses, defeated by the unlikely pair. The warrior lands amidst the dust, his chest heaving as he catches his breath, while the gathered adventurers watch in stunned, silent disbelief at the impossible feat they just witnessed. Its fall is met with a sudden eruption of cheers from Ryuka and the guild members. They are ecstatic, shouting in celebration of the fact that a man they once overlooked has successfully brought down a formidable A-rank monster. He looks back at his cheering friends, a weary but deeply satisfied smile crossing his face. They marvel at his incredible endurance in the aftermath of the clash, noting he is still standing and breathing despite the sheer intensity of the fight. As the dust settles, the true scale of the destruction becomes clear, leaving a somber reminder of the power they were forced to confront. He prepares to claim his prize from the fallen beast, declaring that it is finally time to feast. Despite his exhaustion and the blood staining his face, he stands tall as Iruru rushes to his side. She is breathless with disbelief, praising his incredible feat of slaying a dragon. While her relief is palpable, she quickly shifts to concern, insisting that he seek medical attention immediately for his wounds. He doesn't share her sense of finality, his gaze hardening as he stares into the distance. To her confusion, he mutters that the ordeal is far from over, suggesting a deeper threat still looms over them. With a renewed sense of purpose, he turns to her with a specific request, asking to borrow the power of her unique gift to locate someone. He knows there is one final task remaining, a confrontation with the true enemy that lies ahead.